Is the TV guys ready? Good afternoon, everyone. The Planning Commission is in session. Ms. Gu, would you do a roll call, please?
Okay, for Thursday, October 8th, Chair Thompson,
Here.
Vice Chair Campanella,
Here.
Commissioner Higgins,
Here.
Commissioner Jordan,
Here.
Commissioner Lodge,
Here.
Commissioner Peugeot,
Here.
and Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Gallardo, do we have any changes to the agenda?
We have no changes.
Any announcements?
We have no announcements.
Okay. Do we have any speaker slips for members of the public on items not on our agenda?
I believe
Seeing
we
none,
have none.
we'll close that portion and move on to our first item, a concept review for Direct Relief International at the airport.
Ms. Kennedy will be making the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Thompson and Commissioners. This is a concept review hearing for the Direct Relief Project. The purpose of the hearing today is to introduce the proposed project and receive comments from the Planning Commission and the public. No action will be taken today. The application has not yet been deemed complete, and we have not done the final environmental review on the project yet. Direct Relief is a nonprofit humanitarian aid organization. It provides medicine and other supplies throughout the country and the world. They would like to relocate from their existing location at La Patera Lane in Goleta to a new proposed location in order to expand their headquarters and warehouse operation. Here is the proposed project location. Point out to the south is Hollister Avenue. To the right is Lopez Botello to the north, and David Love Place to the west. This is the new proposed project site. The address would be 6100 Wallace Bicknell Road. This is in sub-area 3 of the Airport Industrial Area Specific Plan, which is what we call SP6. It's currently owned by the City of Santa Barbara Airport. This parcel would be subdivided. Currently, there are actually two lots here. This little park here is a separate parcel, and this larger parcel of about almost 15 acres would be subdivided. And approximately 7.99 acres would be purchased by Direct Relief. And this also includes the construction of a new public road from Love Place to Lopez Road across the site. A little background on this proposal. In September of 2014, Council authorized a purchase and sale agreement between the city and Direct Relief. The agreement, which is dated October 9th, 2014, states that discretionary approvals for the project would be obtained within 18 months, so that would be April of 2016. However, a 6-month extension would be allowed. So that would result in October 2016 is essentially the deadline for this project to be approved. The proposal came in as a PRT application in December of last year, and then in February and in May, both dates, the project went to council. The project was designated as a community benefit project and was allocated square footage and also given a reservation of some square footage, which I'll talk about later. Then the applicant submitted the formal DART application. City did the review. The project went to ABR on 2 occasions, in August and also more recently at the end of September. And then they just submitted their second DART application just a couple of days ago. Here's the proposed site plan. The project consists of a 155,000 square foot project overall. The distribution warehouse, which is this shaded area to the north, is approximately 127,000 square feet with a 2-story office in the front, equaling about 27,000 square feet. There would be a secure truck loading area to the west here and 162 parking spaces. The project also includes 26 bicycle spaces. That would be 16 located inside the building and 10 outside. The project site is zoned AI1, Airport Industrial. A couple of just notable zoning requirements: a 45-foot maximum height requirement. For the parking, it's 1 per 250 square feet for the office, and 1 per 2,000 for the warehouse area, unlike the rest of the city, which is 1 per 5,000. It's a little higher here in this area. And it's also within the airport industrial area specific plan. The discretionary applications for this project consist of a finding of consistency with the Santa Barbara Airport Industrial Area Specific Plan, a development plan for the allocation of 118,500 square feet from the community benefit, small addition, and vacant property categories, and approval by the ABR. In regard to consistency with the specific plan, I've included in your staff report a list of policies that seem to be applicable to this project, and I've listed them here. One is visions in regard to flexibility of land uses in the specific plan area, cultural resources, specifically archaeology, visual quality improvements, let's make improvements to the project site, aesthetics, the installation of a new public road, that's actually included in the specific plan itself, providing vehicle and bicycle parking, promoting alternate modes of transportation. MTD is nearby and will be improved. And then addressing the environmental impacts that were included in the specific plan. The project requires development plan findings, and these would include complying with all provisions of the zoning ordinance, being consistent with the principles of sound community planning, will not have a significant adverse impact upon community aesthetics or character, and that the size, bulk, and scale of the development will be compatible with the neighborhood. And this was reviewed by ABR, and they did make the project compatibility analysis criteria and found it to be compatible. And finally, consistent with the policies of the City of Santa Barbara traffic management strategy as included in the zoning ordinance. The square footage for this project, which equals 155,000 square feet, comes from these categories that are listed here. Like I mentioned, the council designated the project as a community benefit project. They allocated 80,000 square feet for the project and then approved a reservation of an additional 30,000 because the project, you'll see later, the warehouse may be expanded to another 30,000 square feet, so it would be a total of 110,000 from community benefit, 2,000 from small addition, 6,500 from vacant from other areas of the specific plan, and then some other demo credit that is not included in the development plan approval. Here are the elevations of the project. Wanted to mention that this project did go to ABR on 2 occasions. Both times they did receive overall positive comments. More recently, the ABR said that the mass, bulk, and scale was acceptable and that it was compatible with the neighborhood. They had some comments about restudying to restudy and propose alternative surface treatments for the exterior of the warehouse itself, and to install more mature, taller trees initially. In regard to environmental review, past projects have been proposed in this area. We do have an airport-specific plan EIR for this area that was prepared in 1997. There was a supplemental EIR for the Gateway project on this site in 1999, and then an addendum for another project that was proposed in 2005. These projects were not constructed. For the current project, the applicant has submitted revised, updated traffic circulation parking study, an archaeological study, geotechnical engineering study, drainage, stormwater quality study. So we are currently reviewing all these reports as part of the process of the DART review. The next steps for the project, like I said, they've submitted a recent revised project a few days ago. We'll be reviewing that for completeness. When that's determined to be complete, we'll conduct our environmental review. We estimate that it'll be back to you in the Planning Commission in early 2016. And then concurrently, the airport is doing the subdivision portion of this overall project. The airport will submit a subdivision application soon, and that will go to the staff hearing officer for approval. And they're also concurrently going to be doing the on-site soil remediation. So the airport is in charge of that, and that'll be preparing that site for the new proposed project. Just listing here again the discretionary applications that you'll be before you when the project returns next year. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does the applicant have a presentation? Hi.
Good afternoon, Chairman Thompson and Planning Commissioners. We do have a brief presentation for you today. Unlike typical Planning Commission concept review hearings that I've been in attendance at in the past, we don't have any great issues that we're struggling with, staff and the applicant together, where we're seeking some commentary and recommendations from you. Our purpose of being here today, I think, is really to familiarize you with the project from our point of view, to tell you a little bit more about direct relief, and to just prepare you for ultimately reviewing the project in the context of having a staff report and staff analysis and an environmental document. So our presentation is fairly brief today. First, we're going to start with CEO and President Thomas Tighe, who'd like to familiarize you a little bit more with Direct Relief and what they do locally across our country and globally. He's going to be followed by Mark Linehan, who is a board member at Direct Relief and who is on videotape today because unfortunately he's out of the country, but he did want to share his comments with you. And then I will get up and make a few remarks. We've also got other members of the team that I'll introduce to you when I get back up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Tighe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, thank you. For those of you who made the time and actually walked the site, thank you very much for doing it. We know that's exceptional. And, you know, Direct Relief's interest in this project, no one welcomes trying to take on such a project, but I think the circumstances really led us to realize that Direct Relief, having been established here in Santa Barbara in 1948 and has grown up here and evolved as circumstances have changed fundamentally, we found ourselves in the unique position of being the only nonprofit organization in the United States that's licensed to distribute prescription medications nationwide. And that started here in Santa Barbara, working with the neighborhood clinics. And because we've been around for so long and realized that these big gaps after Hurricane Katrina existed, uninsured low-income people, one of the big challenges was getting access to prescription medications. And we had done that for years here in California, where we had a license as a wholesale distributor of prescription medications, although it's done entirely for humanitarian purposes at no charge. So as circumstances evolved, you know, this state-by-state regulation of how prescription drugs are regulated or not, 2 years ago there was federal legislation enacted that finally federalized how the drug supply chain in the United States right now for the 320 million people in this country, there's 556 sites that are licensed that meet the highest licensure requirements to handle prescription medications. Of the 556 centers through which most prescription drugs that go to the American public flow through, one of them is purely for the public benefit, and that's ours. You know, unfortunately, with the elevation of the standards, there's new requirements about how drugs are to be stored. There's security provisions. There's temperature control requirements that we've always been able to get by just because of the climate of Santa Barbara. It's sort of naturally temperature controlled. It never goes out of range for too long. So although we're the only one who's ever received this accreditation and just recently received the reaccreditation, we've been put on notice that we will not be in our current facility. It just won't meet the requirements for security, for temperature control, and other things that are now required. So that's why we're looking for either to improve the site that we're on. Unfortunately, that site is too small. So we have a site that's licensed. We're renting another site across the street. We're renting another one from UCSB. So as we've found ourselves in this unique situation, we have been unable to consolidate, and we're getting less efficient, not more efficient. For Santa Barbara, for residents, I think it's there are a lot of things we don't talk about, certain things that I know Ms. Parch briefed you on when you were taking the tour that we're kind of not at liberty to talk about publicly, but as part of the safety net, the private safety net that backs up public resources in the event of an emergency, we've always done that here through formal arrangements with the counties and the cities. With the state, we're part of the official state activation plan when there's a declared emergency to channel private resources that are available and people wanting to help. But, you know, if you're a vendor to the state of California, you can't give something to the state of California. It looks like a kickback. So they set up a structure. So in a formally declared emergency, people who were willing, the big box retailers, the utility companies, trucking associations, and healthcare companies could participate to help people. And we're part of that with some of the big, those much bigger organizations because of what we've done here in Santa Barbara. So the project would allow us to do a few things. First of all, maintain the accreditation that's unique in this country for local residents, residents of California, residents of the United States, and internationally as well, where we do a lot internationally to the same standards that we use here in the United States, which we think is important. It would also allow us to be more efficient and expand to do things like handle the cold chain capacity. The public, counties, cities don't often have things like large vaccine storage, for example. If there's a mass vaccination event required, as has happened here at UC Santa Barbara, we're deeply involved in that, so we can assist and dovetail in with the public health officials, although we receive no public money. So we'd like to keep doing that. We think it's a terrific resource for local residents. We've looked at scenarios like everyone else to move to Sparks, Nevada, where people are putting up their big warehouses around and we realized we'd lose our staff, which has been critical. No one would make that move. We're not Amazon-like yet, although we would like to just consolidate what we're doing in these three now separate sites to the highest level and give us the capacity to do what we've always done, do more of it, and do it more efficiently for people who find themselves in kind of in crisis, or just filling those gaps that just exist in Santa Barbara, in California for sure, and nationwide, which is what we are doing. So we're excited about it. We thank you. We certainly understand the Commission's need to balance all the equities, and we're keenly sensitive to that as a public benefit corporation. There's no commercial interest of any kind involved here, and we just look forward to doing whatever we can to meet your requirements and address any concerns that exist and have this go forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you said you were going to have a presentation on the video? Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Thompson and members of the Santa Barbara Planning Commission. My name is Mark Lenahan, and I am here on behalf of Direct Relief, both as a board member and more specifically as the chairman of the building committee responsible for the planning, design, and construction of Direct Relief's new corporate headquarters and distribution facility. Over the course of the last year, we've assembled an incredible team of architects, engineers, consultants in order to overcome a myriad of environmental constraints, physical constraints related to this property. As you see the project today, our team has had to overcome archaeological constraints, environmental constraints, geotechnical constraints, floodplain constraints, and I think they've done an incredible job addressing not only those constraints, but also the external constraints that direct relief is governed by. Direct relief is governed by the DEA, FDA, California regulations, and a myriad of others related to being one of the most unique wholesale distributors of medicine worldwide. The project that will be presented before you today, we believe, has addressed all of the issues related to the constraints associated with this property, as well as meets direct relief's goals and needs for the foreseeable future. At the same time, I believe it's been designed to be cost efficient and effective. As I constantly remind our design team, every dollar that we waste or spend unwisely is a dollar of critical medical supplies that does not get to the people that need it most. I appreciate your time today reviewing this project, and we look forward to coming back for a full approval sometime in the near future. Thank you.
Okay. So Ms. Kennedy really covered very well the process that we've undertaken so far, so I'm going to chop that out of my presentation and just now turn to the site itself and familiarize you a little bit more with the site. So this is an ideal location for this warehouse use. It is consistent with the airport-specific plan. It's a large, flat site, and it happens to be in the neighborhood of Direct Relief's existing facility, which, Michelle, maybe you could move your cursor and show it, which is just a couple of blocks over on La Patera. Right, yeah, you're over it now. While it looks large and flat and possibly unconstrained, we had a discussion about that at the site visit, there are actual constraints that the design team needed to deal with, and that I think this project design is responsive to, and so we just wanted to show those to you as well. So on the next slide, here's the site. You see the roadway names. I just wanted to point out those names are actually aviators who lost their life in World War II. That whole area north of the airport has names that reflect local aviators who passed away in World War II. So there's the site, and now the constraints. The red line indicates the area on site that has some cultural resource sensitivity, and the blue line shows you the 100-year flood line. In addition to these, we do have some spot soil contamination areas on the site that are a result of the site having been a military air station during World War II. And we also have geotechnical constraints in the way of soils that are loose and high groundwater. We have shallow groundwater on the site and uncompacted fill and a myriad of geotechnical concerns that the project design team has had to deal with in the design of the foundation system and in the stormwater treatment and drainage plan. So those are subsurface constraints that you wouldn't necessarily see when you go out and look at the site. Next slide, please. So Kathy also covered this really well, but just to quickly go over the major components of the site. The distribution warehouse, it's 130,000 square feet, roughly, if we build both phases at once, which Direct Relief would like to do. If there are financial constraints, they do have to build the 100,000 square feet in the first phase, and they could phase the 30,000 square feet on the eastern end of the warehouse at another time, but we do hope that we're able to build it out all at once. About 30,000 square feet of administrative offices. This is going to be the world headquarters for Direct Relief, and that floor area is necessary. Then we have the secure truck loading and delivery area in the northwestern part of the site. You might recall that's where the cultural resource sensitivities are. So it was a good location for pavement to cap and protect the cultural resources below it. You can see the green areas on site. The westerly green area is a retention basin as part of the stormwater drainage and treatment plan, and the larger space on the eastern end of the site is an infiltration basin. And those are located there because of the types of soils that are below, and Michael Holliday can talk to you a little bit more about that when he gets into more detail. We've got 162 parking spaces on site for visitors, employees, volunteers. Quite a number of those show up every day, and donors. And some of those parking spaces are provided in the truck delivery area, but most of them are in the large parking lot along the frontage of the property. Next slide, please. So the project that we brought before you today, we believe was responsive to these site constraints. It is also consistent, as we said, with the airport specific plan, with the airport architectural design guidelines, and with the design review compatibility criteria. As Kathy mentioned, we were at ABR last week for a second time, and ABR unanimously found that the project did meet all applicable criteria for design compatibility. Again, you don't have a staff analysis or environmental document before you, but we do believe that we've delivered a project that is also consistent with the development plan findings, with all applicable policies of the general plan. The project, according to the technical studies that we have submitted, does not result in any adverse environmental impacts. And in fact, we think that this project actually results in beneficial impacts in the area. It improves aesthetics, it improves circulation, and it certainly improves productivity in this area of the airport industrial area. I'd like to ask Mike Holliday to come up. When we were on site the other day, there were some specific questions that you asked, and we just want to address those. And then I'll have some closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, thank you for allowing us to present today. We'd like to address and we appreciate everybody that came out to the site this week. We wanted to just address the specific comments that you brought up, and one of them was one of the planning commissioners. What are the view impacts? We were able to go out with our laser level and verify that the existing telephone poles that are on site are 37 feet tall, and our building is 40 feet. The height limit is 45 feet. So this is an approximation based on the footprint, the entire footprint of the building, by the way. It's sort of the worst case analysis right there. But this shows you the view from Hollister Avenue when the building is fully built, that there's significant maintained, it retains the mountain views from both corners of the site. We looked at the westerly corner, and then here is the intersection at Lopez and Hollister. And again, the existing trees and on the site obscure the view much more than the future buildings. So that just was a question that was asked by Planning Commission. We wanted to show you that. Secondly, one of the issues was how did we deal with the topography, site drainage, soils and percolation, and what about solar shading and access? This is information that we presented to ABR as far as where we located the building and how it fit on the site. As was mentioned previously, there's some pretty impervious soils out there on the site, so we've actually located the bioretention areas and the filtration basins only where they could work, actually. So, which works with the topography on the site. It's virtually about a flat site, but there's about 2 feet of fall from one end to the other. So we're allowing that to help us in locating the new building, and so those are the ways that the site drainage is being dealt with, as well as the location of the building. Fortunately, we're surrounded by roads, so that as we place this 40-foot high building in the north side of the site, it doesn't adversely affect the adjacent properties, which is a great thing, having these large roadways surrounding the building. And next, bicycle parking was another issue that the members of the Planning Commission brought up. We are required to provide 24 spaces. We're providing 26, 10 outdoor spaces where that little blue dot is located on the exterior. and then 16 indoor spaces. And Direct Relief is very concerned about this being functional space as well. So we've shown the bike racks that we've actually identified that are being used in other facilities that people really like. They're easy to access and get your bikes in and out of. And we've got lockers in those rooms, and it's immediately adjacent to the men's and women's bathrooms with showers. So that all of that sort of functions very well together right off the employee entry. So it's sort of strategically located to make sense and function properly. And I'm going to let Suzanne come up and make a few closing comments.
Just briefly, it's a sensitively designed project, and it's a use that's compatible with the area and compatible with the uses that were envisioned in the airport-specific plan. It's a large project, both in size but in purpose as well, very significant project. And we're anxious to hear your comments and hope that you support this project and are as enthusiastic about it as we are. We have team members here who are available to answer your questions, along with Mike Holliday from DMHA. We have Michelle Swanitz, and we also have Courtney Jane Miller, who is our landscape architect. And also with us is Judy Parch, who is the Director of Compliance and Human Resources at Direct Relief. So between all of us, I hope that we can answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from the staff? I see Ms. Johns and her cohorts here. Do you want to have anything to say? I do have a question for you while you're in the spotlight. Since this is on airport property and you get money from the FAA, does the FAA have any hooks in this that you have to check some squares with?
Good afternoon. Hazel Johns, Airport Director. Chair Thompson, FAA released all of the area on the north side of Hollister from their requirements in 1983 when Southern California Edison built their building. So they don't have any import into this.
Okay, that's good. You just don't need any more letter agencies that you have to deal with.
Correct.
Okay, we'll open it up for public comment. Do we have any speaker slips? No speaker slips. No one coming forward. We'll close public comment, bring it back to the Planning Commission for questions. Ms. Lodge.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, mistake. Okay. Commissioner Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael, can I ask you about that slide on the stormwater management? So the blue lines that are traveling around there, those are going to be like a swale channel that'll be below finished grade.
Actually,
it's not actually going into a detention basin or a percolation area.
The way we've designed it is the site flow. The light blue lines there indicate how the normal site drainage works right now, as it sort of flows from Botello on the north down across the site. The larger blue areas are the two bioretention areas that we've identified. The largest one, which actually is the most permeable part on the entire site, is in the far southeast corner. And that whole blue line that runs along the south end of the site is actually a bioretention area. It's an open, swale.
Okay.
And so we don't have anything enclosed. We're trying to expose all of that. And part of it is being a, environmental education feature that this is how you deal with stormwater management these days. And it does actually wrap around up on the west side of the site because that large truck area, which fortunately a large portion of our site is already impervious. So we're actually removing a lot of what's there, but that does also need to be a bioretention swale area to get the water around.
And in that section then that's like lower left corner, there's actually, your parking lot is, I guess, horizontally stacked there. There's multiple rows.
Yes.
So there's actually, going horizontally, there's a something in there on the plan. Will there be a collection in the center there that's below grade 2, or are you just going to try and run all of it down grade all the way to the
No, if you go back to the let's go backwards to the landscape plan. I have to go backwards. There you go. So we're actually, because so much of the building is roofed area, we're actually able to collect that in roof drains and then direct it right to the areas that we need it to. So since we've got such a large structure, it was infeasible to get it to go around the building. So we're actually able to capture it on the roof and then channel it right where we want it. We've got enough fall.
But the part on the site, but the part also on the there, that
Southeast,
section
yes.
right there where you've got that barrier. I don't know if that's
Southwest.
a barrier. Right where we're going across there off the point of the front plaza there. There's a barrier separating multiple rows of parking lot. You've got 2 rows on the top part of it, 2 rows on the bottom half.
Right.
There. Is that a detention basin in between those areas?
Yeah, the detention basin goes all along the south, and there's going to be pipes that allow the water to flow connecting between those.
Right.
Oh, you're talking on the top. Do you want to?
I don't have the mouse. If you run the mouse to the left and you go up to those 6 trees there, just go up right there. That's the area I'm worried about. Okay.
Commissioner Jordan, Courtney Jane Miller. So I think I can help explain this a little bit better. So the area in question that the pointer is on is actually a vegetated swale. We will have curb cuts that filter the water into that swale, and then it will go underground and exit into the dry detention basin on the west side of the site. Okay.
So every opportunity you have basically where you do have some growth out in the middle of hardscaping, there is some type of cut that functions with something below grade to either hold it there or transfer it somewhere else.
Correct.
Right? Perfect.
And there's actually a 4th BMP treatment option that's been added to the plans recently, and it's called a planter box. So essentially we've added those to the southwest side of the building and also the area between that detention basin and the parking lot. So those are basically vegetated planters that have a gravel filter strip underneath with a burrito drain that will filter that water and then convey it into the basins.
Look forward to seeing that. When I was out at the site visit, I was saying, okay, a cross between what Whole Foods is trading it down and REI only on a Disneyland scale.
Exactly, and we're
exactly
working on the Whole
doing.
Foods project as well. So
I think that'll be a super project when it's done to look at. So congratulations on that. Either for Hazel or Andrew, I learned, I think for the first time the other day, that the city's in a process too of finally developing what will be the new lot on Hollister there, the front lot. I'm just wondering, is there a nexus between the sale of this property and what you're going to do there, or is that a separate project that's just going on its own? And then if that's a separate project, what actually happens to these funds that you gain by the sale of this property?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Jordan, the sale of this property is designated to go to the capital fund in order to support development on the north side, including that area along the Hollister frontage.
Okay, so it doesn't just disappear into the general fund of the airport fund. There's actually a connection between other beneficial development that will benefit either the airport or the city as a whole, right?
That's correct, yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll start with my questions for the applicant. It's noted in our staff report that the ABR asked you to study breaking up the massing and height of the 40-foot high warehouse through landscaping and other design elements. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? I'm looking specifically at sheet A3.1 of our package or of the site plan. Maybe you could put that up and tell us what efforts you have underway in restudying these aspects, if in fact this sheet does, or our package does not already reflect a restudy.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, we'll open up to that sheet so we can look specifically at the question. Oh, absolutely.
It's sort of the best 3D view that we have.
Right.
At this point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the unique and yet challenging aspects of this project is the sheer size. I think this commission mentioned it's probably one of the largest projects that you've dealt with, and it's almost at it's a very large scale structure. So it's almost very misleading to look at it in elevation you need to look at it. That's why we've done these 3D views. One of the things that we think is working for us quite well on the south side of the site is the way that the building, office building, actually is well articulated, and ABR even supported that fact. So the way that it looks, that shows you the view from the southeast perspective and the south perspective. So although we have a large 40-foot high warehouse building behind, what most people will see and what's primarily evident from Hollister is going to be these images. And again, this is concept design, but we really wanted to show what it's going to look like. I think most of the concern that ABR had was on the larger skin of the box. And so we're actually traveling down to Irvine. We're looking at state-of-the-art technology and how we can do innovative, interesting, concrete tilt-up buildings. The other thing that Thomas alluded to, but there are no windows allowed in this building and no skylights allowed in this building. If there's ever some sort of disaster or civil unrest, those are points of weakness. So we really are designing a large 130,000 square foot building that can't have the normal articulation. There's one other slide. I think it was this was a preliminary perspective view on what the back would look like, and gives you a sense for how we're trying to really articulate the concrete panel. And we need to have an 8-inch thick concrete wall between the interior contents and the exterior. So as we look at this, that's really what our ABR look for. They also asked for some larger trees initially because we've got some 3D studies. If you're interested, we can show them to you about Camino Real Marketplace, which is probably the only other large established existing structures here in Santa Barbara, Goleta area that's done this before. So, and it shows that small trees grow big over time. And so we want to plant large enough trees that allow, this shows you what it looks like. And this is 17 years of actual landscape growth on Camino Real. This is the Costco building. This is from a drone 30 feet in the air. And so it's amazing the difference when you're down at the ground plane and then you get up high. And then I think there's one other shot that shows that what they want to see is some higher trees that break the parapet height on the warehouse building. So it's texturing that box, the concrete structure, and also adding landscaping that allows that to articulate. And then also looking at, are there ways that we can articulate the parapet height? We can't go any lower. So if we do anything, it's got to go higher, and that's sort of counterintuitive, and so we're looking at ways to sort of address that concern.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, on that topic, then, I want to ask you, this is still about kind of resurfacing or changing the skin out. I have two questions. First, green building design. Can you tell me what you've incorporated in that regard? And with such a large surface, and this gets to one of the areas that staff asked us to comment on in terms of the bulk and the scale, those really two areas, are there any artistic elements that can be included? So green building and artistic elements, since in a way this is an area, especially with the airport selling this to Direct Relief, that's going to be viewed in transition. So I'm always interested. We talk a lot about funk zone transition, but this is a very different area, but still city property, but adjacent to Goleta. And I think there are numerous opportunities with this project to reference that transition. And then I'll get to cultural history, because that also then is talking about how do we reference the archaeological and cultural history without completely obliterating it in redeveloping this type of property.
Right. Yeah, great points, and we support those. And we believe that the architecture was found to be compatible, but also has its sort of roots in Spanish, Mediterranean architecture. So that's why the buildings that we're showing to you by design don't have red tile roofs, but we're trying to, deal with some of the George Washington Smith-esque massing and proportion and scale of these buildings. That's why you don't normally see tilt-up buildings with this type of window treatment. They're much more expansive. So we've actually used that to deal with the architecture of the structure as it's been defined so far. As far as there's two items that you mentioned. One is green building. Direct Relief is very innovative, and they're on the leading edge of world technology as far as how to distribute things efficiently, get things from point A to point B cost effectively, and with the minimum amount of resources. So we want the facility, and they want the facility, to demonstrate those values and those sort of core values to their organization. We haven't defined a level of green or sustainable practice yet because all of that carries us. We'd love to see it be a LEED, certified building. We're hoping that some donors may want to step up and help us pay for that. Because that's something that's near and dear to our heart. Everything that doesn't cost us a significant amount of additional funds, we're going to be incorporating. If there's additional things that we can do above and beyond sort of the code minimum standards, and as you probably know, California Title 24 is the world leader in energy efficiency, and it's something that we're very passionate about, and they are too. So we want to incorporate as many green building practices as we can. Just meeting the California codes, and especially the new Title 24 codes, are the most restrictive and most energy conservation oriented in the entire world right now. So we're pretty excited about meeting those, but if we can exceed it, we certainly want to. We just don't want to burden the project budget with that. But there are some donors out there who have expressed interest in that, and we would love to see it be LEED certified at some level.
Okay, excellent. Let me go back to, I'm going to go back to page 1 of our staff report. There's a reference to securing or a secure truck yard loading area. I'm wondering if by design, this is a concept review, but still by design, since the securing of that area, Ms. Parch talked about at our site visit, do you also need the same level of security for the distribution warehouse? And does that affect the mass bulk scale and design?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Schwartz, Judy Parch. So the security requirements for the entire distribution center are very high, and part of the windowless, skylightless environment is to meet those security requirements. So any point of penetration becomes a security risk. The truck gates are additionally secured because you're dealing with external visitors to the property carrying drugs every day. The entire facility will be access controlled, so there will be only 2 points of entry for the building itself. One, a public entry, which is being pointed to right now, and then another for employee entrance. And then the entire warehouse will be access controlled from within by badge electronic entry only into secured parts of the facility. So the public access will be only into the public areas of the building in the front, and then the additional layers of security will be added for employee areas, and then higher security for that warehouse area itself.
Well, that's helpful to know because you mentioned at the site visit, this then is my supplemental question, that the tree height, and with Ms. Miller here, this might be helpful, you can only go so high with the trees to accommodate ABR's request because of the high security and the regulatory requirements. So now I'm wondering, does that limitation on tree height then also extend all the way around, not just truck delivery, all the way around distribution warehouse, or is it only that truck delivery square footage area?
It's just that truck delivery square footage, just directly around that, the truck delivery area, because that could be used as an access point.
Right.
For
you mentioned that at the site visit, but now that you're talking about high securitization of the rest of the square footage, I didn't know if that also applied. Okay. Oh, Ms. Elledge, did you need to?
Thank you.
I was going to. I wanted to move on to also my other
I just think it would be helpful for Courtney to cover what she is doing with trees in response to the comment that we did receive from ABR. I think it would be helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Chair Schwartz. So I'll just add a few comments related to ABR's request for the taller trees and explanation about how we're addressing that, as well as your comments. So along the north elevation, that was really the area that the ABR kind of honed in on in our discussions with them in relation to how the landscape helps mitigate the size of the building. So what we've done is, I believe you have in your packet, sheet L3 includes a number of elevations along that north view. And the idea was to demonstrate the growth rate of the species that we had selected for that portion of the landscape. So the last time that we went to ABR, the main comment from that came out of that meeting was that they would like to see a variety of sizes upon planting. So what we had proposed with that exhibit was all 24-inch box trees. What we are now intending to propose are a variety of sizes upon planting so that as they grow, there's a varying height in the landscape along that elevation as well as around the entire building. So that addresses the height of the building. Related to the security issues, currently our method of addressing that is to keep the trees a minimum distance away from the building. So what we've done with this exhibit is keep them on the north side of the warehouse at least 10 feet away. And that's something that we'll continue to address in our selection of the specific species that we're planting. So we will be including trees around the entire building, and in particular at the truck yard entrance, we've kept them away from that gate entry and the wall because the wall, I believe, is 8 feet there. So the idea being that someone could climb up a tree and over that wall. So in that area, we've kept them further away, but elsewhere around the building, it's less of a concern because you would have to climb up over 40 feet in order to get on top of the building.
Okay. Thank you. On page 5 of our staff report, it talks about the specific plan and the zoning designations. And I don't know, Ms. Kennedy, if this is for you. And in a way, this jumps ahead to a lunch meeting that I know the Planning Commission is going to have a reschedule with the airport staff on the planning for this entire area of airport property north of Hollister. But is this the limited set of uses? I mean, in general, it's described as light industrial manufacturing, but it goes, for example, research and development, electronic products manufacture, storage, contractors' yards, lumber, sand, and brick yards. Is there more that, not necessarily today, but that you could bring to us in preparation for that lunch meeting that's been rescheduled so we can look at the full array of uses? Because something the Planning Commission has talked about, I'll just quickly reference this, is with certain uses in the funk zone being displaced, there's a question about whether or not we could find and or encourage a relocation or offer relocation of some of those uses elsewhere within the city of Santa Barbara, the property within the city. So I'm very eager to understand the full extent of what we can do in the airport-specific plan area. I know this is a subset of the total, but I'll just make a note. Maybe Ms. Kennedy or Mr. Bermond could incorporate that, bring that back. Okay. Let's see. I may have one more question at this time. Oh, yes. Going to the staff presentation, the slide entitled Airport Industrial Specific Plan Policies, Cultural Resources, I'm interested in perhaps hearing more from the applicant. The cultural resources pertaining to both Native American and then also memorializing the World War II Santa Barbara veterans, you mentioned, who have streets named after them currently in this area. Do you have anything in concept, in general, in mind in terms of honoring them or referencing or memorializing that somewhere visible on the property, even at this early stage in the project proposal?
I appreciated that came up. I'm sorry, Chair Thompson and Commissioner Schwartz. I appreciated that came up during the site visit the other day, and to date, I'm not aware of discussions that we have had to do so, but I think that was an excellent idea, and we will consider it and respond to you on that question the next time we see you at the hearing where there's a decision.
Okay.
If we could.
Okay, I think those are my questions. I think the rest I can incorporate into comments later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Question for Mr. Holliday. On the construction of the building itself, I'll say foundation just in broad terms, but what type of construction techniques are you going to use for that size of building, considering there's a pretty high water table?
Yeah, Chair Thompson, Commissioner Campanello, very good question. what wasn't mentioned earlier is we're working with a design build team out of Atlanta, Georgia, called ARCO, that has done dozens of these facilities around the United States. So we've really got a design build team that knows what they're doing and has done it many times before. We've looked at the foundation systems, and everything's tied, of course, from existing soil conditions that we have in that area, as well as the archaeological issues that we've got on the upper northwest corner of the building that we don't want to penetrate down into. We've really slid the building as far to the east as we possibly can to avoid that area and minimize any disturbance of that space. And right now we're looking at, it's going to be a caisson type of a system that's going to be going down into the ground. We're looking at options on cost-effective ways of doing that. But essentially the whole building is being raised up about 2 feet and 3 feet in some areas to get out of the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain that you saw runs diagonally across our site. Allows us to lift the building up out of the ground, and it'll be a caisson system with grade beams, and then on top of that we'll do one big slab. The entire floor is at one level, and then the tilt-up walls go on top of that.
So there's no need for surcharging or building up a mound of dirt that delays construction.
We've looked at that.
All of that.
Absolutely. We've looked at that issue, and it appears that we don't have the time, for one thing, to do that, and secondly, it's not as cost effective as if we just go ahead and do what's required.
Okay. The area, and I may have missed it in Mr. George's discussion, the area to the right is a detention or retention basin?
It's a retention. It's a retention area. It's a bioswale. That's basically where we're storing all of our groundwater. It's moving to that area, so we're allowing it to percolate into the ground. Courtney, you may want to make a comment on that.
Can I add to that? It's actually an infiltration basin with detention as well. So it will have less than 24 hours inundation, and basically the purpose is to reduce peak flows, and that's where the vegetated swales will exit into.
So I'm just asking the question, I don't know the answer to this, but by doing that process, you're not causing any problems with the foundation of the building or the high water table or anything like that. That's all going to be circumvented. No issues in that regard.
No, and it's actually set far enough away from the building where that's not a concern.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you both. My other question, I think, for staff is on views, which I would guess that ABR was okay with the public views because they found compatibility, and one of the items would be views, I guess, as part of that determination. Now, is that relooked again after the environmental documents are done? Because there would be a view analysis in there as well as part of the EIR.
Chair Thompson, Commissioner Campanella, so they've made their project compatibility analysis already, but the project would go back to them for their project design approval.
Okay.
So it could be, any additional information could be reviewed by them.
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting when we see there would be a view analysis in there then, correct? In the documentation for the EIR.
We haven't decided that it would be an EIR. We're still gathering information. We haven't decided whether it'd be a view analysis required.
Okay. It is of interest, of course, because, would these be considered established public views, et cetera, that would require some more analysis or some more indication? Or is there already a specific plan there which sort of indicated that this would be a built-out process? So, and there would have been environmental work done at that time as well, I presume, where this would not be considered established public views because it can change, again, from when the buildings are there before and what's planned on the buildings in the future. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So there was that EIR that was prepared for the specific plan, and we would look to that to see what determinations were made regarding build-out of that area, and then specifically at this project if we felt like there was some impact. I don't believe there is, but like I said, we haven't completed the environmental review at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins.
Thank you. So just a couple financial questions. The applicant letter noted
submittal fee of something upwards of $42,000. I just was curious if that was associated with a specific fee in your fee sheet, or did I misread that? It seems awfully high. That's to staff.
Yeah, I'm sure that was correct. We have fees for development plan applications and ABR review, so they add up.
So it all tallied as a cost recovery or staff, or?
I'm not sure the percentage of staff recovery.
No,
on this.
the fees on development projects are established by fee resolution, so they're pretty standard fees depending on project size, project review.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then in one of the attachments, the report that went to council back last year for the purchase and sale agreement or transaction, I just was curious if somebody could help me understand the community support payment. That's maybe airport staff can help me with that. The 12 months after issuance of the CO. There's annual payments. Does the annual payments continue until they sell the property, or how does that work?
Chair Thompson and Commissioner Higgins, that would be an in lieu fee that Direct Relief would pay to the city of Santa Barbara. And if I remember, I don't have the purchase and sale agreement in front of me, but I believe it's a lump sum payment. And annually pay it. Thanks for the
Annually until it says the payment is a
Till
personal
they-
obligation of DRI and terminates upon the sale of the property. When that closes escrow,
Upon the sale, if DRI sells the property.
they'd later sell it. Okay,
Right.
gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to ask about parking, maybe for the applicant. It looks like you have plenty of parking in your current configuration. I know you have to park it per code, in your park per code, but do you use that much parking? Okay.
Yes, we were actually proposing this close to this number of parking spaces before it was pointed out to us that we did have some additional parking spaces to add to the plan under the code. By the time that the employees and the volunteers are come to the site, and sometimes at the same time there are board member meetings and donor meetings, we actually do need that parking. So we're in support of providing it.
Thank you. Does staff have a way of putting up the architectural plans that we received on the slide? And if not, it's okay. I can narrate my question. I'm looking at sheet A.30. And if you can get to one of the other perspectives will work too, sort of the 3D model.
Actually, I don't have those.
Okay, that's okay. There
in
was
my
another
PowerPoint.
slide that showed perspectives. And my question is related to sort of a gratuitous use of block walls in the front of the building. And maybe it's the landscape plans, but sort of are those there? So you have a lot of CMU block walls in the front of the building elevation. Is that part of the security plan to have that? It's almost like a TSA sort of thing, or just voluntary?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Higgins, what you're referring to is the unrendered plans. We've 3D modeled the entire building, and so it's a little bit deceiving, but we're trying to show ABR that we've actually figured out. This is probably a better image to look at. Those actually conceal. They serve two functions. One is on the back side of that wall is the public breakout area for the boardroom. So this whole sort of a box right there where the pointer is located is the conference center component of the building, where we've got several meeting rooms, so that those areas break out, and that wall serves as a functional. It's an 8-foot high wall that basically provides protection, screening, and security actually for the building on the towards the front. And then on the other side, towards the south perspective, there's a employee breakout area for off the cafeteria. So that allows for people to be outside there meeting, and because security is such a high concern, Direct Relief really didn't want people to be able to mingle or come into that space without access.
That's fine. I just was curious if it was
Sure.
a security
Courtney, do you have
thing.
anything to add?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add the walls that you're looking at in this particular rendering, the orangish colored walls, those are actually intended to be semi-private, relatively open walls. So they'll in fact be more like 4 or 5 feet tall.
Okay.
And the intent is, as Mike mentioned, to separate those interior spaces from the public spaces.
And just one more landscape-related question too. On the infiltration basin, what's the slope of the
side slopes?
What's the grade there to get down to the bottom of the basin? And just to help me out, is there any use for? Is it fenced, or can you do passive recreation in that, or is that a no-no?
We are looking at that. In fact, that was an early idea that I thought was very important to incorporate in particular, that easterly basin, so that we could provide some sort of outdoor, more informal, I won't say recreational amenity, but something that's, it allows for an alternative use for that basin. Currently, I believe, I could dig through these plans a little bit, but I believe there is a 5-to-1 slope for about 10 feet, and then a 4-to-1 after that. So it's a very gentle slope down into those basins.
You don't have to fence it.
And we do not have to fence it. The water depth will not exceed 18 inches per Stantec's calculations.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Peugeot.
Thank you. I have a few questions for the applicant, either the applicant or perhaps Ms. Elledge, and they're basically project description kind of questions. So I don't know if someone wants to address those. Our project description expert here at the podium. Okay, the first question I have is the height of the building. Is that driven by internal equipment requirements, or what is it that drives the exact height?
Yes, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to take a crack at answering these questions, and if some member from the team wants to augment what I say, they can jump up. So yes, significant storage inside the warehouse, a racking system that requires that kind of height in order for the building to have the efficiency that's needed.
Okay, and on kind of the height and size topic, this is, I believe, an expansion from your current square footage space by about how much?
Significant. I don't know the percentage increase, but the existing warehouse is about 27,000 square feet, and then there's 13,000 square feet across the street. 24, and then there's an additional smaller warehouse at UCSB that's
about
up to 30,000. So yes,
This
so
is
they're
about
not
double
only
your-
meeting the current need, which they are, they do not have enough floor area currently. They're also trying to project, considering their past rate of growth over the foreseeable future, and get the floor area that they will need over the next few years as well.
And the 30,000 square feet that is potentially part of a second phase, is that would be applied to exactly the same use that the first phase?
Yes.
Applied to the same kind of secured storage area?
That's correct.
And the trucking facility that's proposed now would be adequate for the entire space, including the expanded
Yes, that's
space?
correct. And really, 100,000 square feet is the minimum that they feel should be built at this point in order to meet their needs.
Okay, in order to meet their needs, that brings me to my next question. We learned earlier in the original presentation that the accreditation system is partly what's driving the need to move to a new location. Is there a time frame attached to that? Do you have what's your looming deadline to be able to actually move in and operate by the next cycle?
I think Judy will take that one.
Mr. Commissioner and Commissioner Pujo. So we're on a 3-year reaccreditation cycle with the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy for our what's called VAUD accreditation. It's a verified accredited wholesale distributor. We just completed that 3-year reaccreditation. So we have about 2.5 years before we'll resume that process. So currently we're running about 75,000 square feet of just warehouse facility, but we're also running it at well beyond optimal capacity, so at more like 100% capacity, where 80% is really more optimal. So we could move in and fill 100,000 square feet today.
So your goal then would be to be operational in 2.5 years or less? Is that your goal?
That would be wonderful.
It's ambitious, but I think we'd all kind of have to help you along with that. Okay, and then in terms of employees, maybe I missed it somewhere, but I actually don't feel like I have a handle on what your current full-time employee count is, your number of volunteers, how that would change if you move locations.
Sure. We have, today we have 70 employees. We have roughly 250 volunteers each year, and a board of over 30 members. So on any given day, we have 100 people on that campus today that we're operating. The increase in staff would not need to be as significant as the increase in warehouse space. We've found that over the years, with economies of scale, we do more without doubling. We do more than twice without doubling staff. So we've grown exponentially in what we've been able to accomplish without increasing the staff that significantly. In this plan also, we've already anticipated additional bays in our truck court, so that we would build just sort of knockout bays into the plan for the future expansion, and just use a number of them initially, but allow for that future expansion. And we're also thinking about different ways that we can do the interior design of the office space so that we can allow for an increase in staff as we're planning for
Flexible planning. That sounds good. And is it a 24-hour operation?
No, it is not. Today, it's just we only run one shift in the warehouses, but that certainly could be. We could do more than one.
Okay, and then another kind of locational question. It seems a little on the obvious side, but not being too well trained in this particular kind of facility. I imagine that there's an important need to have close access to things like air transport and highway transport. I mean, were those factors in your location? Is the fact that it's by the airport important to you? Or you've got the train, the freeway, and the airport. It seems like you've got it all, and the highway too.
So the proximity to the airport today is just about use of that FedEx substation that's there. Most of our products are shipped in the United States by FedEx Ground. FedEx is a fabulous contributor to Direct Relief. They contribute most of the transportation for our U.S. distribution, and then we also truck containers of product down to Long Beach Harbor and send them via ocean. We also do a lot of air transport via FedEx, or in the case of larger emergency shipments, we'll consolidate freight into containers and then transport them to LAX or wherever the best transportation opportunity is for us.
Okay, thank you for that. It's helpful. And now, in terms of where the site planning and uses, can back to that nuts and bolts kind of stuff. The use of the site for basically facilities for employees and volunteers. I noticed you have the showers and the bicycle lockers and you mentioned MTD. There's a couple of things I would like to know. One is if someone could point out where the typical kind of bicycle access that you would be expecting, not the parking once you're on site, but the routes that would be used to get to the facility, as well as where MTD stops now for bus use, and then whether or not you have, like, say, cafeteria facilities and things like that on site for employees.
So I don't know that we've examined the bike routes to the new facility for existing staff. Most of our staff comes from Santa Barbara, so it'd be coming from the south on whatever established bike routes are already provided in our transportation and in our roadways. So we really haven't examined that issue unless it's part of our traffic study. No? Michael?
Yes. Chair Thompson, Commissioner Peugeot, let's go back one slide. We can just show you what we have analyzed to the overall site plan. The only, not that. Thank you, Mark. So the only signalized intersection on Hollister is right there. And so that's really where the MTD bus facilities exist, both northbound and southbound, or eastbound and westbound, however you look at it. And that is where probably 70% of the traffic is going to be coming from that route off of Fairview along Hollister and then on Frederick Lopez. And then the sidewalk, the airport is proposing a great project on the front, which is a separate issue, but we're working in collaboratively with them to develop that as the central drop-off for the entire site. And so that's where everybody would be. We were anticipating that most of the traffic, bicycle-wise and vehicle-wise, would be coming from that location, as well as the MTD and ADA path of travel from the bus station that actually goes all the way to the front. Let's go to the rendered site plan, landscape plan, site constraints. Yeah. So next one right there. So you can see what we've done is developed a series of walkways on site so that there's a sidewalk that goes along the roadway right where the pointer is to the front entry. And we're actually resolving the grades so that we're actually crowning that road so that although the building is raised up out of the floodplain, we're allowing the road's going to help us get up there instead of having a bunch of handicap ramps on the front of the building. And then also you can sort of see the path of travel to allow people to come in and circulate all the way around. So we've tried to think through how people get to the bus station and get bicycle parking. When they do come in, there's only two entrances to the building. There's the front entry, and we actually haven't located any bicycle parking over there. That may be something to think about. But primarily what they thought was it's going to be in that area right there, which was the exterior bike parking for the staff. And there's both interior and exterior bike parking. So does that answer your question?
It does. And one follow-up question to that. So if someone was biking in, is there a route where they can take their bike all the way around to? Where's the interior bike storage?
Right there.
Oh,
right
it's
where
right
the pointer is being located.
Can they actually ride their bike to that spot, or they have to get off and walk that remainder of that? It seems like a long walk, and I just hope that there's a lot of thought put into, and it sounds like you're starting to, so I appreciate that. But when it comes back, I would like to see some more, perhaps, thought and maybe thought put on paper on how that would actually work for commuting purposes if somebody wasn't simply just driving in and parking.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Peugeot, if I might add, if someone were riding a bike to the site, as you asked, I would imagine they would ride along, is it David Love? No, I'm sorry, whatever our new frontage road is along the south, Wallace Becknell, and then into the westerly driveway entrance, which is over on that side. And if they drive or ride straight in, there's actually a sidewalk that's curb adjacent there where they could ride up to the sidewalk and walk it across, or they could, use the parking lot essentially.
But it's a good thing. And I'm not asking for that level of detail right now, but I think when it comes back, I would hope and I would be asking to see how those features would actually play out in the site planning and operationally with the employees, because it is a remote site. It's not like you can walk down the block and have lunch or pick up a bus or meet a friend or something like that. Okay, that's
a great comment. Thank you.
And then I have a couple of questions. I think it's more for staff. And it's back to this question of the allowable uses in the zone, which I think is important for us to get a little bit of a handle on, at least next time it comes around. I'm guessing from what I am hearing about the project that it would be difficult to share, say, surplus space if it wasn't immediately needed with other types of short-term lease operations and whatnot. But I believe in this area there is I think I read that there is the city intent to also encourage incubator businesses in this area. And so I guess either unused space that may occur in this vicinity, or in the event that sometime in the future Direct Relief International decides to move elsewhere or sell the property, what would be the reuse and the ability to meet those kinds of goals? Because this is a single operator taking the use of an entire large site, which is, the need is clear, but we're going to need to look at this once it's built for down the road, maybe 50 or 75 or 100 years from now too. So how does that kind of fit in with that goal?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Peugeot, one of the largest limiting factors on land use on this site is prohibition on new open yard uses, and that's in the current airport zoning ordinance, Title 29. With respect to a backfill warehouse tenant, I don't know that can be identified at this early stage. I mean, if Direct Relief were to relocate, then they would be identifying who it is that they're selling that property to.
Commissioner Thompson and Commissioner Peugeot, the purchase and sale agreement also allows, should Direct Relief elect to sell or to relocate that property, the city of Santa Barbara has a first right of refusal to purchase it back for the airport to be used for airport purposes. Andrew's completely correct. 100,000 square foot or 130,000 square foot warehouse would be extremely difficult for the airport to lease just because of demand. There really isn't that. The office space probably could be used. We could get creative with the warehouse, but it would be difficult. Yes.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Peugeot, I might just add that I think the risk of that is extremely low given the amount of resources that's being spent by Direct Relief to both purchase the land and construct the building. They really looked carefully at, and we mentioned it earlier in the presentation, other potential locations that might be cheaper to build a facility like this and be less constrained, but Direct Relief would lose the incredible resources they have with their staff and the volunteer base, and they made a firm decision that staying here in Santa Barbara was the thing to do. So this is a serious commitment they're making. I might just also mention that the purchase contract provisions provide first right of refusal to the airport should sometime in the future Direct Relief make that decision, which is a very unlikely thing, I think, to happen. The airport has first right of refusal, and they also have a discount to the market rate, I believe, the cost of the property.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz, you had one more question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I overlooked one question I had. This is on page 3 of the staff report, and it pertains to what gets triggered from the purchase and sale agreement, which, according to Exhibit C, was finalized by the council or by staff on October 9th, 2014. Now, here's the tight time constraint for the applicant, and I wanted staff to chime in on all of the discretionary permits that have to take place within a maximum of 24 months from October 9th, 2014. So here we are almost 1 year to the date. We're almost 12 months to the date of that 24-month clock ticking. And the 24 is only if a 6-month extension is given beyond 18 months. So how does staff see this process moving along expeditiously to, looks like, a requirement to ensure that it doesn't expire before the applicant can get to the end of their process?
Mr.
And
Chair.
we know some projects take years to get their discretionary permits in the city, and here we have basically a maximum of 24 months, and that was 12 months ago the clock started.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Schwartz.
Yes,
so
thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Where we are right now is they've submitted their their second DART application.
Right, I saw
So we
that.
have a 30-day review. I expect that it will be complete. I'm not 100% sure, but it appears that it probably will be complete, and then we can get right into the environmental review. We're thinking that early 2016 would be the Planning Commission hearing to come back to you. Not sure which month, but maybe March, April, or something like that. So that would be their discretionary approval date. That would be prior to the October, their 2-year maximum time frame of October of 2016.
We just came from this morning's semi-annual joint work session with the council, and we saw the long list of projects making their way through the city and that are on staff's plate with intensive resource allocation by city planning in particular. So I'll just close by asking you, is there any way, if necessary, to grant a further extension beyond the 24 months if get backed up due to city staff resource constraints, the environmental review needs to be more prolonged than initially anticipated? Who knows what can come up? We've been down this road before. Yes, Ms. Johns, thank you.
Commissioner Thompson and Commissioner Schwartz, I would assume, should that happen, should the applicant ask for the 6-month extension, which would be granted, and then find that there is further delay, that we would negotiate another amendment to the purchase and sale agreement. It allows for that. And then it would go back to City Council for their consideration. And given every resource that has been committed to this so far, I would imagine, without a doubt, we would continue to work with Direct Relief.
Okay, so even though, Director Johns, it doesn't explicitly say that in our staff report, there is some provision, I don't know if Mr. Vincent needs to comment, there is some provision for actually an extension beyond the 24 months, because that's not the inference here, the way I
It would
read
be
this.
renegotiated. It would not.
Renegotiated, I
Right.
see. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Schwartz, I might just add that we are all working very hard to not even need to have the 6-month extension beyond the April date. It did take a while for us to get our DART package in, but there was a lot of existing environmental information on this site due to the specific plan EIR and the previous projects that were proposed, and we needed to simply update those technical studies, which we did, and that really informed our site planning, so that we felt by the time that we submitted the package to the city for formal processing that we really have addressed all of the environmental issues to be considered on this site. And our first round of DART comments was fairly minimal compared to most first DART submittals. We didn't have a lot of revisions to make, but we did have to make some plan revisions and add some additional technical study information. So I do think we've got a good shot at being deemed complete with what we just submitted, and we're hopeful that we would actually be back to you for a decision within that first 18-month time frame that's provided for. It's really Direct Relief's objective to get this processed as quickly as possible so that they can begin construction and get in the facility as soon as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Lodge, final questions.
A quick one for Mr. Halliday. I appreciate your calculating the height of the building and how it would look against the mountains, how much of the view would be obscured. My question was that view taken from the south side of Hollister or the north side?
Commissioner Thompson, Commissioner Lodge, we can go back and look at those images. They were both taken from the south side and north side. Actually, we've driven all around the site to see, and we'll be doing more detailed studies. I wanted to show the foreground of Hollister so you can see the entire street there, but those are from the south side of Hollister on both the southeast corner, which is right there, and there's the southwest corner, just trying to show.
So from the north side, somewhat less of the mountains would show. Of course, when all those trees grow in, you're not going to be able to see it anyway. But
yeah, so we were trying to show the mass bulk and scale worst case scenario of looking at the building from that area. Obviously, when you go further north, there's so many existing trees, you actually lose the mountains in the trees. So this seemed to be the best place to sort of analyze. Not to mention that the airport project is going to be in front of that, but we're looking at just sight lines across an open piece of property right now.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have but one question for staff and the applicant. Given the magnitude of this project and it's got a regional impact, is there any plan in your process to have a courtesy review at the Goleta Planning Commission? I know the staff report says you're working with transportation staff at Goleta, but is there any plan for courtesy review by the Goleta Planning Commission?
Commissioner Chair, we have not talked about that actually, but we are, like you say, in contact with.
Well, given the
Public
magnitude
Works.
of the project and the impact on Goleta, I would recommend that you do that. I know it will be an additional delay in processing things, but I think you could probably fit it in there at some point. Good neighbor policy and all that. Okay, comments. Who has comments for staff and the applicant? Any? Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. First, let me say in terms of use, I'm not only appreciative of the work that the work and the services that Direct Relief provide both domestically and globally, but in that you are currently on 3 non-contiguous properties, which is cost and land inefficient. I mean, in all ways that we could possibly discuss. And we're experiencing that with some other uses in the city of Santa Barbara, whether they're private or public or nonprofit. And so this is a unique and I think timely opportunity to bring those 3 non-contiguous property needs and uses together on what seems to me to be a perfect location. And I think the land use is highly compatible. I also want to say that I appreciate that Direct Relief, of all the places they could have relocated their headquarters in needing to expand and update their facilities, you've chosen to remain in the Santa Barbara area, and I'm biased, I want to say specifically on Santa Barbara property. So with that said, and I'm looking at what staff has asked us to consider, and that's both land use and design. I think it's not only compatible, but an excellent use of this land, this portion of our land, formerly airport land. And it seems to me that you have, and you are responding appropriately and effectively and pragmatically to the requests of ABR. It sounds like that's still sort of in evolution. You're still making progress in those areas. I know that we don't want to get too far away from this looking like a commercial structure, because that's exactly what it is. And you have other probably legal and regulatory constraints because of the products that you ship. But I would like to suggest that both from a landscaping perspective as well as a Hollister street-facing perspective, I think there's an opportunity to make this a little more interesting without going crazy. And I think I sort of inferred that maybe in one of my lines of questioning. And not only the water-wise and interesting and varying in texture landscaping, but I think there's an opportunity here for some art. And whether it's referencing some of the cultural heritage, airport heritage, what have you, and if that's a financial constraint, let me just suggest that there are resources in the community, and I'd be happy to share those with you offline, where I think that you could get support for these types of improvements. So I would encourage you not to shy away from that. I think this is an excellent opportunity. We don't have the opportunity for this kind of land redevelopment scale very often, and you've heard that comment before. So here's our opportunity to get everything right the way we want to for the foreseeable future, well beyond our lifetimes. I appreciate Mr. Holliday mentioning you're trying to incorporate as many green building design features as possible. We have some new legislation regarding solar. I'm sure you're taking that into consideration. And I'm just confident that this is going to be a standout commercial project for the city of Santa Barbara. And I really look forward to watching it unfold. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, thank you, Chair Thompson. I basically agree with Commissioner Schwartz's comments. An intriguing idea of incorporating some art in it, if you are able to incorporate that. But it seems to me that what you have proposed has been very thoughtfully considered. It clearly is a need, and it clearly is an organization that deserves the city's help. So I look forward to your coming back to us with your request for the approvals.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Higgins?
Thank you. So thank you for not relocating to Sparks or other parts of the country or world. Frankly, I mean, we're the hub of the nonprofit world, and I think one of the reasons is because you guys are here. So thank you for making the investment. Just in terms of the project, I think the land use is consistent. It's light industrial, and that inherently includes some level of production or manufacturing, and that all of that necessitates distribution. So I don't think we have a problem there at all. I would hope that we would be the design of the project as it has mitigated the constraints that are out there would be processed without heavy-handed EIR, especially given the fact that we've already had an EIR for the area. That seems excessive, especially given the time constraints that the project is under. I think applicant and the team have done a great job of addressing everything out there. There's reams of information available from past projects out there, as I understand, so we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel there. So I guess I just want to know where I'm going to buy my camper shells next when that guy goes away. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think congratulations is probably too early of a word because you'll be back, but I think certainly want to congratulate you guys and the city for both being partners in where you're going to end up. Tuesdays I generally have to report on where I'm going for site visits at home, and it was interesting that in talking about that site, I totally had no clue over most of your a good amount of your purpose. And my wife is like your architect, unfailingly cup full all the time, enough to be annoying. And her response, so when she has a question, I usually sit up and take notice, and that was, considerations of sale of city land and considerations that were made here for a company that does stuff somewhere else. And so it was really a shock, I think, and one of your challenges, obviously, in your rebranding, to learn that you actually play a role locally, you actually play a role nationally, and it's not just international. And that was a real eye-opener to me, and one, I think, that really brings home the both the determination that's already been made for a community benefit determination and where you're going to end up. So I'm really happy that you're going in this direction. I'm especially happy from our standpoint that we're going to be able to leverage the sale of that property for other development out there. I know you guys have probably heard us grumbling about all the vacant land out there and the erosion of in particular commercial use or light industrial down in the funk zone, and why aren't we using the assets we have? And so this is a great step in that direction. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the equation sometime soon or casually over lunch, whichever it may be. When you come back, and I don't anticipate I'll have any problems making the development plan and the specific plan findings. I think this is completely on track and we'll end up fine. A couple things on my list for you, Ms. Elledge, just for when you come back that I'd be interested in. The single signalized intersection, I think, is challenging. If we already know that most of your people, as probably most of the other people out there, are coming out of that area and going left, going towards Santa Barbara, and what that will mean to the, in particular, the backup at that intersection at the end of whenever endo shift is for everybody, and what that will mean for the design constraints on any access, entry, and exit for our property that's going to be in the front of that. So I think it's important for you not only to be ready to address that, but also be ready to play nice with the new parcel owner in front of you on how we all will get in and out of each of your areas and get across that intersection without being 30 or 40 cars in line at a signal. I know you're going to make what I've heard the phrase bus stop improvements. I don't know what that means. I can tell you what I'd look for when people do big projects and there's bus stops involved, and that would be a set of bus stops that have seating and cover over them. So I know there's a phrase for that somewhere. I don't remember what it is, but it might be a pole on the ground right now, so you might say a benches improvement, but I think anytime we get an opportunity to improve a bus stop, we should be providing seating and cover. So that would be one of my things I'd like to hear about. The, I think you have a really good team. I like Mr. Holliday. He's unfailingly optimistic. I like Ms. Elledge because I think she's been around enough to keep the details and to balance him. And I really appreciate, I've never had the opportunity to have a project with Ms. Miller, and I like the fact that you're out of your seat before I pretty much start the question on stormwater. So whether you were briefed in advance or not, but I've seen some of your work on ABRs. I've never had an opportunity. I really appreciate that you've got this team together that's willing to work on this type of stuff. Another suggestion I would have in stormwater, though, is that you're going to put in a tremendous amount of parkway. And I'd like to also see some low-impact development techniques there to where the actual parkway itself, the public parkway, is a below-grade detention basin or swale or whatever it is, rather than your typical, what I think should be going away is your level grass or level parkway that doesn't capture water very well. I think any opportunity, this will be probably the largest project I'll see in my 8 years that has to do with hardscape building and runoff by far. And I think you have an opportunity here because it's not an infill project. You get to start from scratch. Your burden is you got to go find the dollars for it. You don't get to sell widgets. You got to actually find the dollars from somebody. But I think somewhere in the middle there is a great opportunity. I agree with Mr. Thompson. I think it would be a nice thing to do to go to the Goleta Planning Commission, just as I think it would benefit you, it would benefit us. It's a nice courtesy visit. Then when we have something that's in the same situation, they'll probably get the hint that maybe they should come and make a courtesy presentation to us. And so I think that would just be a great thing to do. And then I think too, before you come back for final, I know we had talked about this on the staff on the site visit. I think it did go a long way towards cementing home the community benefit side of your operation to properly involve us in a site visit of your current operations. I think you'll have to talk to somebody in the city and make sure we're doing that the correct way. But I think that would continue to bring home the constraints you're working under now, the mission of your organization, what it means, what it looks like, rather than just another big box building that's out there somewhere. So again, I think a great project. Congratulations to both sides of the aisle. I think this is a win both for you and for the city, and looking forward to seeing this come back, and I hope it's moving along quick enough to get back in the right time, or I hope everybody can logically offer you the time you need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Peugeot.
Thank you. I believe this project is a good location for a very noble use. And I would like to recognize the applicant team for addressing a lot of the issues up front. Some of that, I'm sure, is driven by your need to meet certain timelines, but I appreciate that many of the studies that you'll be required to do are already completed, and I assume that probably means accepted by the city. If not, near accepted by the city, and I think that's very valuable in order to increase the confidence level in your site planning and operations. I think that's very good. For me, the only comment that I have, or the area that I would like to send my message back to the team, is in regards to sustainability. I think you have a substantial opportunity here to include sustainable practices in with your operation. And by that, I don't really mean whether it's LEED, platinum, silver, et cetera. Those titles aren't so important to me as meeting the sustainability goals of our own plan. And I think that many of those have been mentioned by Commissioner Jordan in terms of stormwater. I would echo that. Any provisions you have to further the ability for biofiltration, for collecting roof runoff and reusing it on site, which I believe was mentioned earlier. I would like to see more information on that. And also the potential for use of gray water on site, which I didn't specifically hear mentioned, but I'd like to see what those possibilities were. I think it could be a real model, not only for its world importance efforts, but also in terms of sustainability. And also urban forestry goals. I think you're partway there with your review with design and landscape and the emphasis on new trees. I'd like to see that really be a model for how we can meet our urban forestry plan, our newly adopted urban forestry plan goals for a project. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, an important component to me is going to be not only transportation management, but transportation demand management. And I'll be looking forward to see a plan that really works for multimodal use and getting employees and volunteers easily to and from the site, and perhaps some on-site facilities for daytime and cafeteria use, because they won't otherwise be able to get off campus very easily. So those would be my comments, and I look forward to it coming back and hope you a swift return. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. The finding of consistency is appropriate. Development plan for community benefit, definitely. Design review is already a long way there. it was great learning about the scope of your operations. I was unfamiliar with some of the conduit facility. You're really a conduit to get medical supplies out to the country at a reasonable, nominal cost to many communities, and I think that's just great, and we're proud to have you here. As far as consistency and compatibility, in my mind, I think it's great to have your neighbor in the future be coordinating with you now on the project that you're putting in. And the street scene, you're able to face your neighbor with some indirect and direct relief, if I can call it, relative to the office building and architecture, where you'll have parking lot to parking lot, landscape to landscape, depending on the functions. We haven't seen them yet, what's coming. But being able to integrate all of that acreage at one time with your neighbor, and at the same time your neighbor has the use of funds, making a decision that they never done or don't normally do, to trust you on how you're going to execute, because you will own the property next to them rather than them really controlling it. And at the meantime, giving them the benefit of the purchase price to do a lot of the good work that they intend out there. So I think it's an example of a win-win between the land seller and the neighbor, who will also be your neighbor, and look forward to getting updated also on the airport plans so we can see how everything's going to be integrated out there. And anyway, good luck, and hopefully your process moves quickly from here on out. Thanks.
Okay, so you all got a lot of wide-ranging comments and questions. Does staff have everything they would like to see from this? The applicant, any final words, comments?
Yes, I just want to thank you very, very much for your thoughtful comments. We, too, hope that we're back to you swiftly. We really appreciate hearing what is of interest to each of you, because it will give us the opportunity to focus on the parts of our project that I think are responsive to what we heard today. We just didn't get into those details with you as part of this sort of higher level review of what we're doing. So thank you very much. We'll be sure to focus on those things when we come back. And we certainly want to extend an invitation to take a tour of the existing facility. We mentioned that on site the other day, so we'll work with staff to do that. And I just want to also give you some comfort that Direct Relief has been in very close communication with the city of Goleta. There was actually a period of time when they were exploring where to go and where they might move, where the city of Goleta helped them to try to find sites in their jurisdiction. They wanted them too. There's a competition going on.
Well, you can go and give a briefing to the loser then.
Right. So I just want you to know that they are well aware of the project, and we have been meeting with their staff on all of the transportation-related issues, and they participated in scoping the traffic study, and they're reviewing and approving the traffic study, and will be providing comments to your city staff. So they are well aware of the project. And so anyway, thank you very much again. We'll see you in a few months, hopefully. Yes.
Yeah, and I would just like to also extend my thanks, and just to comment a couple of things. The light rail that will terminate at the Goleta train station, I think, is something that we're hopeful that employees who are commuting from Ventura will be able to take advantage of within the next year. And the side of La Patera we're on is Goleta, the other side is Santa Barbara, so we're always straddling. We love everybody. We're non-political, we're humanitarian, so we aspire to keep that. And finally, just having been in Haiti and having been in Nepal, I appreciate the importance of planning and the consequences of the failure to plan. You know, as a humanitarian organization, the sad fact is that more people die for a lack of planning than anything else. I mean, the construction techniques, the design, how water is treated, how it gets people sick. It happens all over the place. So it would be wildly inconsistent with what we do and where we work to find any objection with any of your questions. They're all good, and we will. That's why we want to stay here. We want to stay here and not be hated by people for putting up a big ugly box. So all the questions are fair and good, and we will do everything we can to accommodate every one of them as best we can. And I look forward to having you out there and briefing you in depth on what we do, and to the historical perspective, which it's a rich history. I mean, from the Chumash that we're sensitive to the history of the land, to the the history of the airport and why it is in Santa Barbara. It's a fascinating history, and we hope that with that much space, if we could engage something to make it an interesting place to visit, we will absolutely do that and work with all the residents of the local community to address those concerns, which are important for us too. Thank you for what you're doing.
Okay, well, excellent project. We look forward to you coming back expeditiously, we hope. Time is money, so good luck. Okay, we'll take a recess until 3 o'clock so the staff and applicant can get set up till the next item.
Pardon me, boy, is that the Chattanooga choo-choo? Track 29. Boy, you can give me a shine. I can afford to board a Chattanooga choo-choo. I've got my fare and just a trifle to spare. You leave the Pennsylvania station about 3:45. Read a magazine and then you're in Baltimore. Dinner in the diner, nothing could be finer than to have your ham and eggs in Carolina. When you hear the whistles blowing 8 to the bar, then you know that Tennessee is not very far. Shovel all the coal in, I gotta keep her rolling. Woo, woo, Chattanooga, there you are. There's gonna be a certain party at the station, satin and lace. I used to call that chick Funny Face. She's gonna cry until I tell her that I'll never roam. So Chattanooga choo-choo, won't you choo-choo me home? Chattanooga choo-choo, won't you choo-choo me home?
It's a pity to say goodnight, because I never saw stars so bright. But if you gotta go home, you gotta go home. Give me a good night kiss. It's a pity to say farewell, because the man in the moon.
In session. Our next item is 800 Santa Barbara Street, AUD project. Ms. Galarte.
Chair Thompson, Ms. Regal will be making the presentation.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair and fellow commissioners. The project at 800 Santa Barbara Street is an AUD project. It's back for its second concept review. You previously reviewed a version of the project on May 21st, and the focus of today's review is to provide comments on the revised conceptual design, including feedback on general plan consistency and the previous comments that you made and how the project has been revised. At the May 21st hearing, the key issues that were raised were related to neighborhood compatibility and impacts on the historic resources in the immediate neighborhood. The project returned to Historic Landmarks Commission on August 12th. You have minutes in your packet dated or attached as Exhibit F. The summary of those comments and concerns were expressed, focused on size, bulk, and scale, architectural details, and compatibility with the neighbors and its historic character. I'd like to say that between the time it was here at PC in May and when it went to Historic Landmarks Commission in August, they did remove one story and they infilled the central courtyard of the project. They reduced the number of units from 26 to 24, and they reduced the project, the total building size by about 2,000 square feet. Since HLC, the applicant has continued to make some revisions to the project, including the elimination of one of the interior units, so we're now down to 23 units. They enhanced and widened the interior paseo. They have revisions to incorporate less symmetry and changes to some roof elements and some further recessing of additional windows. And the architect will discuss those revisions to the project in greater detail. I did not include plans in my PowerPoint presentation. Some project statistics. You can see the approved project in the first column, and I'm sorry it's small, but trying to get all this information on one slide so that you could see it all at once, was for 6 units. It was in a building of approximately 14,300 square feet. It was 37 feet tall and had 24 parking spaces. The current proposal is 23 approved units. It is 20,083 square feet. That's roughly 5,600 square feet difference in square footage, 17 more units. And it's shorter than the approved project. It's 35 feet tall. I'd also like to make reference to a mistake that was just pointed out to me. There are 29 proposed parking spaces in the parking garage. Looking at the priority housing overlay and the density chart, the previous version of the project that was reviewed by the Planning Commission on the 21st of May was at 63 dwelling units per acre. We are now at 56 dwelling units per acre. I just wanted you to see where we fell on that chart. Staff's recommendation, some key points are that the project does meet the zoning standards and the applicant is intending a design that does not require any zoning modifications. They do have greater than the minimum setbacks required from interior and front property lines. And the project is consistent with the general plan goals and policies for new rental housing and projects. Staff recommends that the PC comment whether the project is consistent with the compatibility criteria number 2 through 5 that are outlined in the municipal code, subsection 22.22.145 subsection B. I do have those on following slides so we can go through that. These are questions that the Commission should ask themselves. Is the project compatible with the desirable architectural qualities and characteristics which are distinctive of Santa Barbara and of the particular neighborhood surrounding the project? Number 3 is the size, mass, bulk, scale, height, and scale of the project appropriate for its location and this neighborhood. Number 4 is the design of the project appropriately sensitive to adjacent federal, state, and city landmarks or nearby designated historic resources, including structures of merit sites or natural features. And number 5, does the design of the project respond appropriately to the established scenic public vistas? In order to evaluate number 4, I did provide you the related maps showing or relevant maps showing the boundary of the original El Pueblo Viejo, which is shown in the dark gray, bounded by Figueroa, Laguna, Ortega, and State Street. The various colors show whether some buildings or properties have landmarks, adobe buildings, structures of merit, potentials for designation, or structures that are built prior to 1945. In this next slide, this is showing the El Presidio de Santa Barbara Historical Park properties in yellow that make up the park. And then a 250-foot buffer that surrounds that is the kind of red outline with the gray clouding. So I have passed out these slides to you. You have them in front of you. I'm now going to turn it over to the applicant for his presentation of the actual design of the project and how it has changed since your last review.
Okay. Mr. Hockhauser, are you going to give the applicant briefing?
I am. There we go. Thank you. I'll I'll reiterate good afternoon to everybody. I'd like to start off by just going back to Suzanne's information. The staff report for the PC hearing where we last appeared indicated that our prior project was 26,000 feet. You had indicated 22 on your chart, but our notes and our drawings and your staff report had indicated 26,000. We're now reducing it down to about 20,000 square feet. So I think we certainly want to come before you with movement, and that's an important fact. So I'm going to take about 23 minutes today with the presentation, if that's okay. I'll move quickly. I understand time's of the essence. We appreciate the opportunity this afternoon to hear this project. The latest refinements and modifications for the AUD housing application at this address is what this project's about. We believe the apartment project before you now for consideration and discussion is an opportunity to deliver real infill rental housing at a great location in the downtown. We certainly feel it's more aligned and better, has a better consistency with policy than the luxury condominium project that's approved now on site. We think this is a much better policy project. It is our intention today to demonstrate to this commission that this current project is not only significantly responsive to concerns and issues raised at the prior PC hearing and all the HLC hearings, but is a project that champions and incorporates the objectives and design goals set forth in the city's urban design guidelines. And I want to emphasize that because those guidelines are quite literal. Not only do they have textual information, but they have diagrams, scale diagrams about paseos, placitas, and the character of the architecture step backs. I am going to assert politely today that we are extremely consistent visually, empirically with those guidelines. More generally, I intend to demonstrate that this proposal, while grounded in the AUD ordinance and the housing policies of the general plan, is also now compliant with policies which address historical resources. We understand the role and purview of the Historic Landmarks Commission, and we understand the intent and goals of the Trust for Historic Preservation. But we're looking to the Commission to look at the entire general plan and apply that when they evaluate this policy and a critique on this project. So quite literally, the previous project before you was 27 units. We're now at a 23-unit project. It's important to note that not only has the number of units come down, but the average unit size has come down as well. This is critical because the AUD ordinance is predicated on small unit size to maximize density. We're well below the lowest threshold, and we're well below the allowable number of units. We've got almost a 25% reduction in our square footage. Our height, as pointed out by staff and this chart, is now down more than a full story. We've eliminated the interior courtyard and created a paseo that is in literal consistency with the guidelines, as I just pointed out. We've also incorporated a small public, semi-public placita at the project frontage on Santa Barbara Street. And this was in response to Commissioner Peugeot's orientation that this project should have a good interface, especially at this location, relative to the adjacencies to historic resources and public use. Furthermore, after our last HLC appearance, we've worked and pulled resource material together to illustrate our consistency with the detailing and vocabulary that I think this commission and the HLC wants to see for this project. The parking, there's above and beyond the density now being proposed. We're providing 2 extra parking spaces above and beyond the AUD requirements. We've got significant bike storage. The setbacks, I think it's important to underscore the setbacks. When you look at neighborhood compatibility and you go all around the neighborhoods around this site and all around the Presidio, this project is exemplary in its setbacks. The setbacks are further inside the site than the existing parking lot. So we're adding to the planning buffers that currently exist on site by having the perimeter of the building inside those line between existing landscape and parking lots. So not only do we add landscaping on the periphery, but I would point to the fact that relative to the neighborhood and compatibility, we've got commendable setbacks. Further in the presentation, as I move quickly into it here, I think the applicant, John Donaldson, convinced that he's bringing a good project, hired a surveyor to go completely around the Presidio and document the height of all the surrounding buildings that are against the boundary of the Presidio State Park. So we now, not only for this project, but for future projects, have a reference point that other applicants and the city can use to evaluate size, bulk, and scale. And lastly, before we get into it, I want to call your attention to a letter submitted from our neighbor, our stakeholder immediately to the north, the Anacapa School. And I would sum it up by just going to the last paragraph of that letter. And I think that'll illustrate the movement and the responsiveness that we've undertaken to get before you today. Okay, next slide, please. One of the things we endeavored to do is to bifurcate this project by this Paseo. One of the critiques of HLC was that the Paseo was too narrow and that on the upper floors, units that faced each other were too close. So we widened the Paseo out, in fact, to exceed the standards and recommendations in the urban design guidelines, but we also eliminated a unit, so there's no conflict between opposite units across the Paseo. The Paseo visually breaks down the mass, so you have really two distinct clusters or volumes on the site. Next slide, please. And you can move through that. And this is where we're talking about right here, this separation right here. This used to be 2 units. We now have 1 unit. We offset opposite balconies. I might point out that in the design guidelines, there's an illustration of balconies just opposite each other with one person on one and a neighbor on the other, and they're reaching across to kiss each other. We've taken a little bit more conservative approach and separated these to exceed those recommended standards. Furthermore, we've reduced...
Mr. Chair, could I just ask a question? Mr. Hockhauser, would you either differentiate as you go along that what we're seeing is exactly what you presented at the last HLC meeting, or if these have been revised again since then?
These have been revised to address the 17 comments.
So as you go through these, could you make sure you mention that they have been revised since you last appeared at HLC?
Yes, I can do that. So one of the main issues at HLC was the proximity of units across the Paseo. And so we've widened the Paseo and repositioned the units to address that comment. One of the things they requested are virtual modeling and view simulations. Those are in today's presentations. We've reduced roof heights. We've articulated roof masses. We've added additional detailing and architectural vocabulary to illustrate consistency with the commentary that we received from HLC. So if you go to the next slide. Quickly, these slides illustrate the previous proposal before you relative to today. The red dotted line indicates the volume and mass which was before you before. Next slide, please. And then this is a shot showing the Paseo splitting the mass of the building here, the Anacapa School at this location. This is the small commercial plaza. When I say small, I mean about 1,000 square feet of placita in front of a small 1,383 square foot little commercial space, and then varying roof pitches and roof types to address those comments, a softening of the architectural elements at the corner. Moving right along, please. And just going right around the building here with the different views, and we can come back to these. I don't want to use up time. Keep going, please. And that's, I might stop here for a second because this, in the minutes, they like the elevation facing the Anacapa School. That's what's before you right now. Next slide, please. With and without vegetation. The landscape plan, you might note in the HLC minutes that they thought the landscape plan was moving in the right direction. Another kudo to Courtney. She's a landscape architect on this project as well. Right along, please. Keep going. Oh, yeah, open up the next file. So, this is right out of the urban design guidelines. This is that small placita with the little porch underneath. This is literally what our section would look like through the front of the building on Santa Barbara Street. and it's taken right out of the guidelines. The guidelines are replete with discussions about intimate paseos, little placitas, interfaces like this. And I think the project, not to be too proud about it, but I think it really does address specifically many of the attributes you can find throughout the guidelines. Go through this. It talks about encouraging this type of design, and then you've got literal examples of it. And then here we're into the view simulations. You see going east on De La Guerra, and we've got several, so we move around different points to show you. But this is kind of a third from Santa Barbara Street. You see the view of the project inserted there. And then as you move closer to the corner, the next slide, please. The next slide. And then this is coming around onto De La Guerra, on Santa Barbara Street. And then the opposite side of the street. Next slide, please. The above slide is the proposal. This is, as it exists today. And then the next slide. Now here's a streetscape of all of De La Guerra, and show the inserted project as proposed with the modifications of height. And I think if one looks at all the architecture up and down the street, I think, and also we provided, by the way, the heights as surveyed of various elements on the buildings around us. And I think this is a great one to underscore the compatibility of size, bulk, and scale. The next slide. Yeah, this is a great illustration that shows actually the surveyed forms and masses of buildings all around and contiguous with the boundary of the Presidio. So the purple elements are the 3 and above story, the green are 2-story and above, and then the very, very light shaded ones are the 1-story elements. And I might point out that we only did the structures. There's other structures of mass and bulk, but only the ones that are contiguous to the Presidio were utilized in this analysis. And then you can see all the heights and the story analysis. The proposed project is really a fish swimming right in the middle of the school. So we're not asking for any exceptional height. We're not violating the fabric and the texture of what exists all around the Presidio. There are many buildings that are 4 and 5 stories, 60 and 70 feet, right up against the boundary. As pointed out by the Anacapa School and our actual design drawings, the half of the project on the north side of the Paseo that I described is literally lower and further set back to that boundary of the park and the Anacapa School than the project that's approved. Okay, moving right along, please. And then these are just examples of some in Santa Barbara, some without, of little paseos and intimate streets that show balconies and residential situations, which is really, if you read through the urban design guidelines, it's all about this kind of approach to the architecture. Next slide, some more. And then just to underscore that the architectural elements in our proposed design very much incorporate these kinds of headers over deep set openings, columns, heavy timber eaves, literally the stuccoed adobe walls with the tile caps, these kinds of balconies. If you look at our drawings, this is what you find throughout. We're working with the HLC. We believe we're on the road to a successful evaluation by that commission, especially with these responses to our last hearing. So with that, I will like to point out that, we feel like we've addressed the concerns that we've heard all along, and we've got a project that, even without the AUD, in terms of size, bulk, and mass, and architectural styling, being within zoning issues in terms of setback, height, step back, we're right there. And this is an AUD project trying to deliver, through and consistent with housing policies in the general plan, some housing to the downtown. So I'll save the remainder of my time for, questions and, further discussion.
Oh, thank you. Any of the Commissioners have any questions for staff or the applicant at this point? Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. The last set of notes that I have from the HLC is from August 12th. Is that that's the last time that they saw this project?
That is correct.
Okay. And what we are seeing today is a response to those comments?
Yes,
and
Commissioner
to the HLC.
Yes.
Both the response to those comments and the comments that were made by this commission.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Puccio, question?
Thank you. Yes, a couple of questions. My questions really relate to the first ground floor level of the project. One, you have been talking about the placita that you've been incorporated. I think some of this may have to do with the scale of the drawings and the clarity of the prints in reading it, not just even on this small scale one, but on the one that we had delivered to us. I'm having a difficult time understanding exactly how that placita that you mentioned works and how it relates to what appears to be a lot of vegetation on the street corner. Can you just go a little bit further to it and how the access to the commercial
if I may,
square footage?
I would love to explain it to you. So this placita is about a little over 1,000 square feet. It interfaces, this front of it interfaces with the sidewalk and the crosswalk as you come up De La Guerra from the west. Okay, if you recall, if we go back to a site plan, the intersection is offset. So as you're moving east on De La Guerra, you actually have to go around this jog here. So De La Guerra, the crosswalk from this side of De La Guerra comes across right here. And this placita has a complete interface with the sidewalk. It is partly exposed to the sky and partly under porch, just like the diagram that I provided in the urban design guidelines previous. So this is kind of like a little commercial plaza for tables and chairs. It might be an ice cream shop or another coffee shop, a small restaurant. And then this is about 1,400 square feet of commercial space along the paseo of the project.
And the orientation of the commercial space is to the paseo or to the street?
To the placita, to the street.
To the placita.
So these are the openings into the commercial space right here.
Okay, and then the ground floor residential units that face the street, not the ones that face the Anacapa School.
These guys?
Yes. Could you just kind of walk me through where their outdoor space is or their outdoor living area? And I bring this up because one of my concerns is how that cuts off or could create a potential conflict with the public use of the street, with someone maybe having their outdoor living area right where there's a major pedestrian activity with tourism and whatnot.
Well, again, this is a fairly significant landscape buffer. The access to the units is from here, from the paseo, and then these are private little patio areas that are buffered from the retaining wall. There's a natural sandstone retaining wall at the sidewalk of about 2 to 3 feet, and then there's this 10-foot landscape buffer, and behind that you've got a private little patio. So any pedestrian traffic that might occur on the sidewalk is not only below the sandstone retaining wall, but then you've got about 10 feet of vegetation between that wall and that private patio. So there's no direct traffic from this sidewalk at this point to these units. It all comes from here. The elevator's right here. Bicycle parking's right here. There's lots of traffic that would come through here. By the way, I might mention, Commissioner Puccio, that consistent again with some of the larger policy goals of planning, this paseo is on direct access with the historical fountain in the building behind.
Correct, yes. And the front, the residential unit closest to Santa Barbara Street, that has, where is it, outdoor? No, sorry, the other one, south, down there.
Again, it's right at this corner here, but there's 20 feet of landscape buffer between the edge of that little patio and the corner.
And what encloses that? Is it enclosed by a wall?
It's recessed deeply into the mass of the structure so that the walls look really thick.
I see. So the walls come up around a little bit. I can kind of see how it might do that. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Higgins.
Thank you. On the page 3 of the staff report, there's a table that shows the approved project, the May 21 review, and then the current proposal. And there's a blank there in common open space. So it looks like you had 1,500 square feet of common open area, and now you have 0?
That's incorrect.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so one of the last issues, one of the things that happened, Commissioner Higgins, with staff is before they let us come back to this HLC hearing, they wanted to review the drawings to make sure substantial changes were made and that we met all variance and zoning code requirements. And one of those issues was to make sure that we met the common outdoor open space. So the courtyard that the Paseo runs through actually meets those dimensions on the interior of the project here.
So is that area increased from your previous? It must be then.
Yeah.
Yeah, the square footage is doubled or something like that.
Yeah, it more than exceeds that requirement.
And for staff, this may take you a second to maybe measure it on Google Earth, but what's the distance from the project site to the transit center?
I don't know that measurement off the top of my head, but I wanted to speak to that table on page 3.
Oh, sure.
There are actually 2 different methods in how you can provide your outdoor living space. And in that table, the previous 2 projects were using method B, which is a common outdoor living space method that has to have one area of 20 by 20 and 15% of the lot area as open space, dedicated open space. In this particular method, he is using method A, which is private outdoor living space. He must provide private outdoor living space based on the number of bedrooms in a unit, whether it's ground floor or second floor and above, and a 15 by 15 foot area, which he is including in that Paseo. So he's using a different method. That's why you see certain boxes grayed out, because it didn't apply to the previous 2 projects for the private outdoor living space method, but it applies to this project. So that's where you're seeing the difference.
Okay, I guess.
If that makes sense.
I think it does, but there's still common open space in the Paseo that ought to be characterized here in this table.
Right.
Must be missing it because it's not private outdoor living space.
Commissioner Higgins, we had to provide, so the design provides both private, every unit has an outdoor space, and then we have, to illustrate it, about a 15 by 30 foot space right in here.
Okay, that's just not included in the table.
It's not included in the table, that's correct.
Okay. So maybe to the applicant, where are you at with your existing entitlement? How much time is left? Are you still balancing this project versus the other one if you don't get what you need here? Or what just,
Well, I
try
think,
to answer that if you can.
I'm going to. I think the property owner who's sitting here, John Donaldson, is somewhat comforted by the fact that that entitlement is good till 2017. But I think it's a preferable project every which way we look at it, both from the city's standpoint and from his standpoint, to do a rental project at this location rather than develop the luxury condominiums. One of the things we're excited to share with this commission as we advocate for the project is the fact that the difference in square footage between that approval and what's before you today is not that significant. It's about 4,500 square feet more, but for the difference of what it means to the city, instead of 6 luxury condos, we're now talking about 23 rental units that average square footage is 775 each. So there's a big difference in what it's doing to help address those policies. But it's nice to have that, given the complexities of approvals in Santa Barbara.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Speaking about the project that has some entitlements, it has Planning Commission approval for a tentative subdivision map. The project has not received design review, project design approval, or final approval, or any building permits. So all those things would have to occur before September of 2016 is when the current expiration date is.
Okay. Commissioner Lodge, Commissioner Jordan, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you've done enough to confuse me over what we're looking at here. So on your plans that you handed out, you have some elevations, like on the first page, with a dotted line that shows the previous approved project, which I take to mean that's the height of the condo project,
That's correct. The blue line represents the entitlement that exists on site.
All right. And the elevation you're showing there is what you're proposing right now?
That's correct.
And what is the last line of height that you showed to the ABR in August? Is it the same as on this elevation, or is it a higher height?
No, it's a little bit higher height. Some of these roof elements were lowered, and this roof element here was lowered, but it's, relatively speaking, very close to this, but there are some changes.
Okay. And then, so again, you're here asking comments on something that, from an elevation standpoint, that HLC has seen, but we haven't seen.
No, HLC has not seen this. Nobody has seen what's before you today.
Okay. And then the slides that you went through, the 3 slides on 24, 25, 26, which are your visual simulations.
Yes.
From De La Guerra, from Garden, 2 spots on De La Guerra, 1 spot in Garden. No.
Two on De La Guerra, 2 on Santa Barbara.
And then, that's what I meant. And has HLC seen those?
They have not.
Okay. That's troubling. So then, Ms. Regal, could you remind me on the whole distance from whatever the proper phrase would be for historical or cultural sites? So you drew the line at 250. What are the considerations inside that 250 line? And isn't there a step up? Is there a lower distance where there were greater protections, and then once you go past that distance, but you're to 250, it's kind of like a guideline, or less protections? Could you just remind me what those 2 stages are?
It's 100 feet of a designated structure, and it's a 250-foot buffer around the El Presidio de Santa Barbara Historic Park.
Okay.
Should be sensitive.
And in the 250, then, we're clearly inside the 250. What are the considerations there for protection in general?
I am having to read through the last PowerPoint. It's not on that PowerPoint. If you give me one moment, I can.
You want to come back to me?
Yes.
Okay. If somebody else had questions for the applicant, they can let her keep looking.
Okay. Commissioner Higgins, another question?
I'm sorry to do this to you, but the red line says what?
That was the previously submitted project that the HLC and the Planning Commission have seen. Yeah, in other words, when we were last before this commission, that represented the 4-story design.
For apartments?
For apartments.
So that's not the approved project?
That's not. The blue line is the approved project.
So the exhibit that I have here shows the red line as the previously approved project. Right. But that is not what,
That's
accurate.
a typo.
Okay.
That is a typo.
So that's kind of a big deal. So I'm sorry, now the blue, maybe take it from the top with that.
I appreciate that. Okay, so let me make it clear once and for all. The illustration is the most recently modified project that is responsive to HLC's comments. The red line is the 4-story version that the AUD project that was before this commission in May. The blue line is the project that was approved by the previous property owner, Foley.
I see.
And that's the luxury condominium project.
I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Peugeot, question?
Thank you. I do have one last question before we move on to public comment. Could staff, I imagine it'd be a staff question, please remind me of the existing and proposed legal status, I guess I would say, of the Paseo? Is this a dedicated public space or a private space?
The Paseo as drawn on his plans?
Well, the Paseo as it exists now, where the flagpole is, and then as drawn on the plans, I don't know what the difference is between the two.
Okay, so how it exists today was discussed, was the subject of a historic resource report, and it did speak to it being an important resource to consider about the placement, and that project proposed to maintain that Paseo through the radial stair and the flagpole in its existing location.
But maintain it in what capacity? Private open space or dedicated public space?
It was still going to be private.
Private. Okay. And then how does that compare with the Paseo on this design?
Is still, I believe, designated to be private access.
And perhaps Mr. Halkhauser can,
I would like to.
Dimensions and status.
Okay, so let me tear into this a little bit. So everything on the property would be what's considered by the guidelines like semi-private, where the public can use it, the commercial space public comes on and uses the placita, but it's not considered public property. The guidelines specifically identify public, semi-public, and private. So our intention is to create a semi-public placita and a semi-public walk that allow people to circulate through, visit a friend or a neighbor, access their apartment, or come and sit at a table on a cafe looking at the clock tower down the West on De La Guerra. So that characterization is directly out of the guidelines. I could find the specific sections and numbers for you, but it's like right there to use semi-public placita for public use.
And I appreciate that, but then your intent is to allow the public to access that, so there wouldn't be any gates. If someone wandered through, but they weren't a patron of the commercial space, if they used it as a shortcut to get from point A to B, that's regardless of time of day, that's allowable or not allowable?
Well, our intention right now is to kind of make that a welcoming place to go through. There's security at each apartment. The building's going to have security, but our intention isn't to gate it off. That's going to be a commercial plaza. It's going to have all kinds of public using little tables, cafe. We want to make it kind of an inviting place.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it? Okay, Commissioner Schwartz, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what may be causing confusion, so Mr. Hockhauser, I don't know if you have a slide in particular, is to clearly identify and sort of juxtapose the differences or the changes to your project from the most recent date of the HLC hearing and what we're seeing today. Not, for example, the juxtaposition of May 21st to today, because it's gone through another lens. It's gone back to HLC, and you've made further revisions. So
Okay.
could you, I don't know if, do you have a slide, or I don't know if staff might have a slide?
I might be able to go to.
I think that could clear up some confusion that I'm hearing in the back and forth.
Well, and I'll help clarify that. What I probably should use is go through the HLC motion, the 17 points, and discuss in specific detail where those changes were made so the commissioners can understand. I will use our most recent elevations to describe what was and what we have now. So if you can go to the elevations, please. Okay, so let's talk about the frontage. One of the comments, number one, was to provide simulations. So after we made the changes per directives from HLC, we modeled this in the computer and provided simulations which we intend to take back to HLC and that we prepared today for you. The number two, continue working with neighbors. Well, we have had some continued dialogue with the Anacapa School. We haven't had any dialogue with the trust. That's been difficult. Number three, the Commission is concerned with the viability and livability of the interior units. That was specifically with regard to the two paseos facing each other, the two balconies facing each other across the paseo. So what happened is this neck was 10 foot wide straight through. the whole project. We widened it at the entrance to a little over 11 feet, but as it moves into the interior, it grew to as much as 18 feet wide. So we have a much wider separation between the balconies. Plus, we eliminated one unit to increase the relationship of balconies in terms of privacy. That was the comment with regard to livability. So that what came about because of that was the reduction of a unit and the significant widening of the Paseo at that point. That also reduced some of the building's mass. It opened up the Paseo to make it wider and alleviated some of that congestion. Number 5, further reduction of mass, bulk, and scale are requested. So we lowered some of the roof heights. We changed the roof height over here and lowered it from where it was. We articulated some of these roofs and instead of gable, added a hip, modified balcony roofs. We did that on both the Santa Barbara Street elevation and the rear elevation and articulated and reduced some of the mass. Number 8, I already explained. That is part and parcel to the livability. Number 9 was just cleaning up some of the illustrations on the windows. Deep set windows need to be traditional. Our intention is to make them very traditional and comply with that completely. The architecture is lacking charm. I had discussions with one HLC member. He says, just your drawing style, get it away from the computer and illustrate the softening details that you're talking about to be more rustic and poetic. And I think that's just a design thing that is easily addressed. The challenge is to make this the best AUD project in the city. We do want to make it a good AUD project, no question. An arborist report is in preparation. Part of what I just explained was varying the symmetry and changing architectural elements to eliminate the symmetry and address comment 13. So you don't have symmetry either side anymore of the entry to the Paseo, but you've got a gable with one kind of balcony, you've got a hip with another kind of balcony. The same kind of treatments were applied to the rear to break down that symmetry. That was the concern. At 14 didn't need address as the commission was supportive, and again, the Anacapa School likes the direction that's going. Number 15, the architecture should align with the corner configuration. I think that had to do with site planning and making sure that the building is oriented on both streets as you approach the corner, and we've done that. We've articulated the corner here. As you can see, please go to the Santa Barbara elevation. There, you can see these forms step around the corner to address the big curve of the corner there. They asked to show the outline of the subterranean garage on the landscape plan. We've done that. And, that addresses all the comments. And as I stated at the beginning of my presentation, item 17 is we intended to address with this presentation both PC comments and HLC comments.
Okay, thank you. I also want to ask you about ingress, egress on the project as you've currently defined it. I don't know if you have a sheet here in our plans that adequately describe that. Maybe you have a slide.
Well,
with 23
might say,
units, I'd like to have a sense of how
as the
residents.
Topography drops as you go down east on De La Guerra. We took advantage of that to create from the alley access to the subterranean garage. Again, just taking the opportunity to remind the commission that subterranean parking is an expensive thing, but it is a good thing for the city. It is a good thing for the project. It's certainly one of the things that I want to point to that help address sensitivity to historical resources and to address Commissioner Jordan's saying, what are those sensitivities? What does that involve? There are no specific empirical guidelines. It's just like sensitivity, size, bulk, and scale. So the way we handle the parking and the way we bifurcated the project to make this lower than what was already approved, we believe goes a long way towards addressing those sensitivities.
And the alleyway you're talking about, that's De La Guerra? That's on East
this
De La-
is the alleyway that runs
But I mean,
through.
it comes
Off of
Are you
Delegara.
saying goes all the way through? I'm trying to recall.
It goes to the back of the Anacapa School. There's parking
Yeah,
back
so
up on the-
that's my point. Ingress, egress is De La Guerra Street.
Right.
Right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
My other question for you is from one of your slides. I think it's slide 27. You have it marked as 27. You have a number of properties in the area that I think you were saying should be the relative properties for compatibility consideration. It's called De La Guerra Streetscape, I think is how you've identified this slide.
Yeah, it would be just before this.
The prior one. There you go.
That's it.
Mm-hmm. So maybe you could just quickly identify these properties on either side of...
Yeah, I'll start, Commissioner Schwartz, I'll start it all the way over here, Anacapa Street, coming east on De La Guerra, with the surveyed heights of building elements and mass along the street. This is Santa Barbara Street. This is the subject site in the corner. These are our two basic roof heights of this project, the height of the roof at this corner, the height at this corner, and these heights. And then what we've done is actually worked hard to gather photos and create a streetscape simulation that is aligned with the location of the buildings on the scale aerial to show the relative mass and architectural impact of all the existing development in concert with what's proposed.
Okay. I think those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Higgins, you had another question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to the chagrin of the city attorney. I neglected to disclose an ex parte I had. When he turns around, I'm sure he'll glare at me, but I did have an interaction with the applicant and his attorney before this hearing.
So should I wrap your knuckles? Is that...
You may.
Okay, Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, just a slide or two back, there was this strip across the top which showed the relative heights of the buildings, but the first request from the HLC was to provide a photo sim showing a building's view impact on the impact on the mountains, specifically Montecito Peak.
Yeah, go back to the view.
There's no way that I can tell what's going on in the size of that.
There you go. There. So this is the first slide taken on De La Guerra, looking towards the property. That, I believe, is Montecito Peak. And this is the project. What we did is we surveyed story poles to get reference points to the virtual image so we can accurately insert the model of the building into the photographs with certainty that we're very close to the exact heights of the building. We then moved up the street and took another picture, next slide please, closer to the site. And you can see the height grows as you get closer. And then we went around the corner and took pictures, if you go to the next slide, both from right at the corner, looking right across the site. And we were very careful, again, this vegetation, these trees right here, would be removed with the proposal that's before you today. But it does open up some mountain views here. The massing of the building would block the mountain views here. These mountain views would be maintained. Then the next slide, we went across the street from a pedestrian standpoint, walking up Santa Barbara Street, looking at the site. This vegetation is maintained in the landscape plan and saved, and these are the relative impacts of the proposal.
Okay. And then, well, that's helpful. You have, I couldn't find anywhere in all the various bits of documentation we have here. You said there are now 23 units and how many parking spaces?
There are 29 parking spaces.
29. And how many are required for the commercial?
3 are required for the commercial.
Okay, so you do have some above what's required for the number of units. And then have you not yet determined how many, have you not done interior floor plans? Do you know how many bedrooms they're going to be?
Well, I can give you a good idea. As this is a conceptual review, we have the unit sizes. And I would, as I stated before, anything in 650 and below would definitely be a studio. From there to 850 would be a 1, and anything above that would probably be a 2. But we don't have a specific bedroom count as of yet.
Okay, so I'm sorry, the larger units would have how many bedrooms?
2 bedrooms.
2 bedrooms, okay. So they're not going to be any 3-bedroom?
No, there are no 3-bedroom units.
Or 3-bath, okay, units proposed. Okay. I still have a concern about the livability of the one unit that seems to be entirely interior. It looks as if you just combined, you said you combined 2 of the units to make it just one. It's from nowhere from inside that unit. Can you look out into anything other than other passageways? Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Lodge, but that's indicative of so many residences on Paseos. That's very typical. And I might point out, I don't think I addressed Commissioner Peugeot's comment about the width of the Paseo. The guidelines specify a Paseo width of 10 feet as a minimum, and then they go on to discuss even narrower Paseos for intimate projects. The illustrations in there, which somehow I'd like the Commission to see, show a very tight Paseo with balconies opposite each other. But what we did is we widened that out to 18 feet and then went ahead and oriented the balconies so they weren't directly opposite each other. And our discussions and our feeling about this is that this would make a very handsome, in addition to the little windows that would occur around the perimeter, having a nice balcony with glass from the interior would make a very nice unit. It's true. They would be the unit that does not get the mountain views or the long-range vistas. They don't get
any views.
Well, a view into the Paseo.
I mean, except the units across the way.
Right.
So I have a concern about that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If that's all the questions, we'll open it up for public comments. Commission. Beg your pardon?
Sorry, could you see if Mr. Eagle has some answers on the...
an answer to a question? Okay.
Chair Thompson, Commissioner Jordan, in Exhibit E, on page 7 of 23, HR 2, which is Historic Resource Element 2, Policy 2, it says, ensure respectful and compatible development. Seek to ensure that all development within the city respects rather than detracts from individual historic and archaeological resources, as well as the neighborhood and the overall historical character of the city. Assure compatibility of development, respect for the historical context of historical resources, and consideration of sustainable design alternatives where compatible. Then under that, there are possible implementation measures. And that's where the 100-foot dimension.
So the ones that I'm remembering that have to do with driving pilings and shade, those are the less than 100 ones? I seem to remember something we went through where we talked about if you were adjacent, you wouldn't be able to pile drive, you wouldn't be able to cast shade on an adobe. Are those the more, and maybe I'm just messed up in my recollection of the whole general plan process. Does it ring a bell?
I don't remember that discussion. What the radiuses talk about is further protection of 100 feet of a historic resource being identified and flagged for additional scrutiny for impacts on those resources prior to either approval of any development application or all development proposed within 250 feet of a historic adobe structure, El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Historic Park, and areas inclusive of the original footprint of the Presidio and other city landmarks to be selected.
Maybe they're just part of the discussion.
Mr. Chair.
So.
I think it's time for Mr. Vincent to have a speaking part.
In this particular amount of space away from such, it is purely a consideration.
Correct.
Language.
Correct.
Mr. Vincent.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Jordan, the construction activity condition or implementation action is HR 2.3. It's on the same page 7 of 23 in your staff report. It says assess potential damage, ensure that construction activities in proximity to historic structures do not damage the historic resource. So it's one of the other implementation actions of the policy HR 2 that Ms. Regal read to you.
What I'm just remembering are probably just examples to be used as part of that implementation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, public comments. Commissioner Lodge, I believe you have a letter from a member of the public. If you'd read that into the record and then make it available to the staff for the record.
Yes. Kellum DeForest hoped to be here, but he wasn't able to get transportation. And his message essentially is the Pearl Chase Society objects to such massive and inappropriately designed buildings which lack sensitivity to the historic location adjacent to the Presidio and the Historical Museum. Respectfully, Kellum DeForest.
Thank you. Mary Louise Days.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Mary Louise Days. I'm on the board of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation and the Citizens Planning Association, and I represent them today. It's hard to know where to start because the notice that I received in the mail did not say that this is an entirely different plan from the one that went to the HLC on August 12th. The notice, the agenda item does not give the number of bedrooms. This is an entirely new proposal. I'm really shocked that staff would allow when a whole new proposal to come to the Planning Commission when the project is in the jurisdiction of the HLC. One of the minutes for the HLC say that they would request that any presentation by the applicants to the Planning Commission be made after the next HLC meeting where they could see the results to their comments. This is, well, it should not have to be pointed out that there might be some manipulation attempted here, and I'm certainly not saying that, but it does confuse everyone. It confuses the neighbors, and certainly the commissioners. I'd like to, before we forget, the staff report includes the general plan item HR 2.8 to settle Mr. Jordan's question. At least I think this can partly settle it. It does say all the suggested implementation that would be for all development proposal within 250 feet of historic adobes or the state park and areas inclusive of the original Presidio and other city landmarks may be subject to measures for additional protection. Such protection may require adjustments in height, bulk, size, and setbacks, and that is in the general plan. We still are concerned about the effect on this large project on the nearby historic buildings. The state park is on two sides of the building, and then the site, and then the site to the east contains an important 1920s building. The Historical Museum is catty corner. That's 50 years old this year. It's not designated. And there are other nearby buildings that should be designated. There is an adobe at just immediately next door to the historic buildings in which Anacapa School is located. Now, I was curious about the number of bedrooms, and Commissioner Lodge did refer to those. The staff report does not, the agenda item in the staff report do not delineate how many bedrooms there would be as the previous proposal did. It says, the staff report says there would be 23 units, and it also says there would be 23 bedrooms, and that's hard to believe that there would be just one bedroom, especially on that very large item that was pointed out.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I also raised the question of how can the wonderful tree blankets that are there on the property be retained if there has to be grading and excavation for underground parking. that is one reason why the HLC asked for that to be shown very clearly on the landscape plan. I really doubt that there can be any retention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gordon Sitchie.
Thank you, Chair Thompson and all the commissioners. I'm Gordon Siki. I'm the headmaster of Anacapa School, and we've been located for 35 school years in the downtown area, and since 1984 at 814 Santa Barbara Street. I just would like to ask Jan, has our counsel, Greg Parker, seen your latest?
I'm not sure if I think I did send it to him. Yeah.
I think you want to address your comments to the commission.
Okay,
It's public
thank you, sir.
comments. It's not a question and answer.
Okay, well, as far as I know, Greg Parker hasn't seen this latest revision. And to my knowledge, he based the letter that you received on the previous presentation to the HLC. And I just needed to clarify that Greg's out of town. I texted him and couldn't get a clarification if he's actually seen these. So that's an unknown right now. And really, I would need his advice to respond to these current changes, his opinion of that, and I defer to him entirely on that. I just would like to make two other comments, and that is with regard to the fact that there are high buildings in the vicinity around the Presidio and the Pueblo Viejo. Yes, I know. Carrillo and Santa Barbara Street has a very tall building. There are tall buildings around. However, that corner is a very unusual corner. It's a very challenging corner. It's a very, in many ways, it's just an anomaly, obviously. And having a large height of a building there on that particular corner, I think, presents a different situation than Santa Barbara Street and Carrillo Street in many, many ways, because it's just so odd the way it turns. You guys have you have a very big challenge with that corner. It's opening up to the Presidio. It's an opening up to the town. It's quite an exquisitely interesting, and for our students, sometimes a dangerous corner. But we know the corner is not going to turn perfectly perpendicular. It's going to be what it is, and I do hope that you guys will, in fact, look at that in terms of that unique quality. I think we put into this letter many requests in terms of protecting the school and the demolition, all the aspects that are going to really impact the school. And I think Mr. Parker's done a great job of that, and I know you'll take a good look at that, and I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other speaker slips. Anybody else want to talk? Oh, there's one gentleman. If you'd come up forward and...
I'll make it quick because I'm running out of time for my parking.
That's important.
I can't comment on all the...
Well, give us your name, Mr.
My name is Ed Clark,
Huh?
and I live in Santa Barbara. We need more apartments. I think it's a great location. I know of Jan's style of architecture. I know he's going to be very sensitive to the city and to the community and to the neighbors. And I know the location's got an AUD overlay, and I'm assuming that the city and planning, decided very carefully what areas they were going to choose to, for this type of projects. So I'm excited about it. I think it's great. I think we need as much apartments in downtown as we can get. It'd be great for people. I mean, we have a lot of condos with very, very few apartments. So I just encourage you guys to, look at the whole picture, and I'm very supportive of it. And you can go 5 stories as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Any other speakers?
Commissioner Drury is here from the HLC.
Beg your pardon?
Commissioner Drury is here from the HLC.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, I would have spoken to the plan as presented to us on August 12th, but I think it would be inappropriate to speak to this plan that's new to me and would be new to the HLC. I would stand by the comments and under the motion that we made. I think you have that document in hand. I would stand by those that we made on August 12th, and then we'll see what happens when it's presented to us whenever that may be.
Yeah, this iterative process going back and forth between the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission is probably getting quite a few people confused, because the only reason to go back and forth in an iterative process is to make changes. So invariably, at each review, there's going to be something that the other board hadn't seen. So there's no way around that.
There's no way around it. Other
than you have two boards see the same thing and then make a change, and then two boards see the same thing, you know. So I understand that it's a little bit confusing to some people, but there's no other way to get it done.
And Mr. Chair, I would also say that your comments, the Planning Commission's comments, are well taken by the Historic Landmarks Commission. We rely on your expertise.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thompson?
Okay, any other public comments? We'll close the public comments, and Mr. Hockhauser, you still have 15 minutes if you want to use it.
I'm happy to tell this commission that I will not need to use 15 minutes. So just a couple of points. I really hope that I emphasize to this commission, I hope that I emphasize to this commission our responsiveness to the issue of height. Only a small percentage of this site asked for a third story. When we were together in May, this commission asked the person, Bill Mahan on the HLC, whether he could support a third story on this project, and he said yes. We're working in that venue. One of these slides that I show, and I don't need to find it, showed the subtle difference between the height of the project that's entitled. I might point out that the trust tried to appeal that project and was overturned at City Council. So I don't know that that height would even be supportable for them. Our height is marginally higher than that project to get an AUD project and deliver apartments to the downtown. I also explained to this commission we tried to bifurcate this mass so that the half of the project closer to the park, the Presidio, closer to the Anacapa School, is in fact lower and more sensitive than that which is entitled today. And then I really do hope that the exhibits and the work that was done to illustrate the context, both around the park, I mean, we talk about congruent or contiguous with the property line of the park boundary, but we can talk across the street, up and down, all around. I feel sincerely that the size, bulk, and scale of this project is completely consistent with the neighborhood, and that our generous setbacks, the little placita, are the kind of things that make this site special and address the goals, all the policy goals for the city. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. So now it's back to the commission members for comments, and I want you to bear in mind that staff is looking for feedback about project compatibility, size, mass, bulk, and the height of the project, and the design of the project considering the adjacent historic resources. Commissioner Jordan, you want to lead off?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I asked that question to Bill Mahan, and I think he said no on 4, but I don't think he said yes on 3. I think he hedged his bets. So I'll have to look back, but that's okay.
I'm absolutely certain of it, but thank you.
So, you know, my overall feeling on where we are now is this is a step backwards. I agree with Mary Louise Days. She won't agree with everything I say today, but this presentation and this situation is a mess. Okay, I'd politely just call it a mess. It's like playing whack-a-mole right now with something that the HLC hasn't seen, we're seeing. I think the documents that we have aren't even accurate with what you're presenting. I was not set up for this type of process by staff or by the applicant. I thought our role was to look at the bigger picture of the applicant's presentation to the August presentation to HLC and their concerns and offer advice. And that's not the position we've been put in. I just totally a step backwards. Now, as to what you want from this, you know, the last thing you heard at HLC was 270 straw vaults that said your architecture wasn't going to meet what they wanted and the size, bulk, and scale was not going to meet what they wanted. Okay? I don't think I have any say in the architecture. The architecture right now seems to be a moving target. and that's not my strong point anyhow, but I don't even think I can take a shot at what you presented here today versus what I'm looking at versus what the HLC saw. In general, I think given the what are guidelines, I think your setbacks, your lower height, your overparked, your reduction in square footage, and the argument that you make that you're compatible with the other uses and the sizes of the buildings in the neighborhood are supportable. As to the rest of the points that we've been asked to address, specifically, I have no idea what we're trying to answer here today. This project is, I think, is such a moving target and poorly presented that I'm hesitant to begin to even stab at it. From where you were the last time to here, I think you've accomplished steps that, for me at least personally, have taken care of the views, have been respectful of your neighbors, offer a land use that is more than consistent for its location with the city goals. But I'm not really happy in the way it's being presented and the way it got here. Okay, so I don't mind the message. I'm going to point at the messenger. So those are my comments. I'm really frustrated with how and where this got to us at this point, and an HLC group that hasn't seen it, a packet that isn't reflective of what we're seeing in front of us today from a presentation, and doing some homework on being able to comment on what the HLC's concerns with, but supposedly those concerns have already been taken care of with the applicant. If this was even a functioning world, not a perfect world, the applicant says he's complied with all the HLC comments, well then go back to the HLC. I don't know why we're here today. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Higgins, comments?
Thank you. So a couple positive comments. I think you're obviously heading in the right direction. Can't argue there. You're moving towards something that is probably hopefully going to end up being more compatible as you continue to get beat up here along this bumpy road that is the city of Santa Barbara's process. So ask you to sort of still pay attention to the HLC comments and work with the neighbors and do what you can. I think the interior unit is an opportunity. I think that despite the fact that it doesn't have any views outside, it's fine. Lots of sort of other European cities that have such development, and that's sort of an interesting thing. Maybe a quieter unit, but nonetheless, I'm sure you'll make it architecturally sort of beautiful inside, and it'll be a bonus. The architectural design, again, not an architect, so I'd have to rely on what HLC says, but it seems to match with what's on De La Guerra. Streetscape interaction with De La Guerra is fantastic. The courtyard, the Placida is fantastic. I think I would love to see something a little bit more engaging, or maybe even a little bigger if you can afford it. And I'd love to live here. I think it's a great site for housing. So I just want to reiterate that. I am a little disappointed that we don't have better exhibits or statistics. The chart, as the speaker indicated, doesn't show what I believe is an accurate bedroom count. You went from 17 in the 2008 approved project to 30 bedrooms in your last go at it in May, and this chart shows 23. That's just simply consistent with the number of units.
Yeah, that's a typo. That's
another typo. Okay, so if I add up on your chart, any of the units that are over 700 square feet are counted as twos, and anything below that is counted as a one bedroom. I get 38 bedrooms.
I got 36, so
it's close enough. I think you have a challenge with parking here, unlike other AUD projects that we see that are in other areas where street parking isn't a problem, like on Outer State. downtown at this particular location, parking is a premium, and so I would encourage you to try to free up some additional parking or reduce bedroom count or reduce unit count. I think you're going to be challenged with parking. I don't think this is even though this has got the AUD overlay on it, I think we've obviously, and we had this discussion this morning, we set some maximums in the code, but this particular site doesn't lend itself to the maximum densities because you're a little further away from transit as compared to some other AUD projects we're seeing. We do have quite a number of units in the queue for AUD. A very successful, obviously very attractive program. So the city is going to end up doing quite a bit and participants are going to end up doing quite a bit to add housing stock. Again, I guess you're hearing from all of us and the public that this is not the best site for maximizing the density. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And I just encourage you to continue to get more support from the neighborhood. You had one letter of support, but you've got an uphill battle. Then I think some of the land use policies that are in there. Again, our last hearing we had straw polls, which looked to me as I look back at them, looked like you sort of didn't quite get there on a number of the very important elements with regard to historic resources in the area. So. This process is available to people to come in and take advantage of, but you maybe dug yourself a little bit of a hole that we would have looked for maybe a better stab at coming back, given the strenuous comments that were provided last time. So again, the hole's maybe a little deeper than you started out with. Some of these land use policies that you really got to pay attention to, in addition to the ones that were mentioned, LG 12.2D, community character preservation, ensure that the proposed development will not eliminate or preclude preservation of key visual assets of the particular block or corridor, including landmark structures. Now you're probably acing 95% of these policies with your housing and the land use elements, but you just are not able to get around some of these other ones, and that's why I'm reading them to you. Review HR 2.2, review bodies shall not consider other existing incompatible development as justification for additional potentially incompatible development. There's some of your projects that you're citing along De La Guerra probably are not compatible with historic policy, even though they're already developed. HR 2.7, stepping back of buildings within buffer areas, another development standard. So we talked about that, and you've done that, but I think you need to keep heading that direction.
Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz, you have comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'd like to start with process. The process that we're experiencing, just to remind everyone, is one that this commission and the City Council agreed to. So if we're not finding the process to be efficient and effective, then perhaps it requires a reconsideration of the process. But, candidly, Commissioner Jordan, when you say it's a mess, we designed this process to allow an applicant to come back to the commission in between or iteratively with the design boards. So you can say that this is one aspect of our experiment in terms of the larger experiment with the AUD projects, but the iterative process is actually built into the formalized process. So could be lesson learned, but the point is we're here, and I'd like to try to make the most of it productively. When I look at the balancing, and to me that's always the key word, we have a lot of policies in the city, we have values, we have principles, we have guidelines, and the balancing is what's difficult and what's key, and especially in this very sensitive area of historic resources. I guess what I'm not understanding from the trust, and full disclosure, I have a friend who sits on the trust board. I respect the trust, but when I look at the history, Ms. Days, I know you're representing the trust here today, going back to 2008 where the trust appealed the luxury condo project, and now we have a rental project. I don't know, and I haven't heard, and I've watched all the HLC hearings. I haven't heard what would satisfy the trust. So I'm personally at a bit of a loss to understand how to bridge the divide between what the applicant has put forward iteratively and what the trust, among some others, but specifically the trust, I think has been the strongest opponent, what the trust would find acceptable. So I'm not seeing anything coming back from the trust saying, we're not comfortable with X, but we could support Y. I don't see a Y design that's come forward. So what I would ask of those who are in opposition of much of what we see today, or what HLC saw at its most recent hearing, is trying to find a solution instead of just opposition. Something will get built, something will be redeveloped on this site, and I think it's our collective responsibility to work together to try to make it the best project that addresses the greatest needs of Santa Barbara with the greatest sensitivities to everything we've been talking about, and clearly historic resource is one of them. Now, when I look at many of the historic resources in the immediate neighborhood, commercial, residential, and mixed use, there's not one homogeneous model. There's not one, just a singular model. We have apartments in historic resources that have no open space, that are smack up against one another, and they step out of your balcony and you see your neighbor doing whatever your neighbor's doing on the adjacent balcony. That's intimacy. So part of the definition, as I've been thinking about it, is, here's the word balance again, and the tension between balancing. If we want intimacy, then that also means living and working closer together. That means lines of sight. It means physical distance between one another and residential to commercial. It means we're going to be closer in, and we already have those examples right downtown. So I'm just at a loss to understand if we're not adequately surveying or inventorying and considering all the various examples of beautiful and intimate and architecturally, sensitive and beautiful properties, already developed properties in this core downtown, in this area of El Pueblo Viejo, that don't all look alike. And we have commercial units looking directly out at each other. We have residential units smack up against each other. So some of the concerns that I'm hearing on this project and this property already exist downtown on historic properties. So I have to say I'm not getting it. I'm not understanding where the angst lies when we are currently living with, and I would assume appreciating, very similar projects. They've just been here for a long time. Maybe we don't even notice them anymore. Maybe we're not even thinking about in what close proximity a lot of these other residents downtown are currently living, whether they're renting or whether they've bought, condos that are right up against one another. Now, in terms of, there's a particular slide that the applicant has presented. It's numbered as 25. I'm not sure what to call it. It's the visual simulation of this property, of this project on the corner, this very important corner of Santa Barbara and De La Guerra, What I appreciate since we last saw this project is the stepping back of what appears to be the second and third story. So maybe you can help me with that. Not that one. There's you have another slide that shows on the bottom the property as there we go. That is today, and then on the top I think is the visual simulation. So an improvement, I believe, from what we saw previously. That would be on May 21st?
12.
May 12th, excuse me. So we have a reduction of one story. We have a stepping back, as I can see it, but correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hockhauser, of the second and third stories, which this Planning Commission often asks for to break up the massing, to possibly open up public view sheds, which is within our purview. And I think that's been accomplished here. So I appreciate that. I'm going to echo what Commissioner Higgins said in that I do believe this project is headed in the right direction. I also want to comment on something else Mr. Higgins said, which is this interior unit. We have a lot of interior units in Santa Barbara, and we're not the only community that has these sorts of things. And depending upon how they're designed and the landscaping and what else is in the proximity, they can be real jewels of units, of residential units. It all depends on how it fits with the rest of the property, the rest of the project. So in concept, I'm certainly not opposed to it, and I think that the design has improved, not being an architect myself, but appreciating aesthetics and the Santa Barbara aesthetic. I think that we see a much more visually appealing project today than we did in May. And I think we can even do better, but I appreciate the streetscape. Again, I want to echo what Commissioner Higgins said. He called it fantastic. I'm going to say it looks good, and I think we can even do better, which I know the applicant is probably working on. The mature trees are very important, and it's what's really hard, of course, is to replace existing mature trees with, can't even be comparable trees. I hear from landscape architects that you can't just transplant or plant a mature tree and expect it to survive as easily as when you start with smaller trees and then allow them to grow. But that means there's a period of time when there's exposure to the building. So I'm sure HLC will further comment on that. But in this visual simulation, what I want to point out, and I don't want to belabor which of these trees are going to remain, HLC can work on that. I think that the screening with the natural environment, the landscaping, is so important to softening that important view as you come up Santa Barbara Street. Because there's a stoplight there, if there were no stoplight here, you'd go right through it, and I doubt that many people would even look to the right and see this corner. But because we have to pause, and the lights are timed such that you have to pause pretty often, I can tell you, since that's a main corridor for me, you pause and you naturally look over to the right. So whatever is developed on this property, and I get it, it's so important to be sensitive, and that view shed up to the mountains, we've talked about it, and will continue to be very important. So to the extent that, and what I don't see, I'm sorry, Mr. Hockhauser, the building behind this on Canna Perdido, I referenced this in our May hearing. I think it's 222, if I got the address right, Canna Perdido. It was visiting nurse and hospice. It's now something else. That's 3 stories at least, but I'm not sure what the height is, that plate height. But I was wondering, yes, you're going to show that. But I was wondering now with this design that you have, this iteration, how your new 3rd story plate height compares with this other 3-story building behind it on Canna Perdido.
Yeah, I can tell you right away.
Because that other building right now partially blocks the mountains. So that's part of the sensitivity. We've already got buildings blocking part of our public view shed of mountains. So the question is, what's appropriate for a building coming in front of a building that's already encroaching into the public?
Commissioner Schwartz, item Z on the schedule is a surveyed height of 40 feet to the ridge of the Visiting Nurse Association building. The proposal is at 34 feet.
Okay. I don't have the visual of it. That's okay. I think there's still some confusion about, maybe not, I'm trying to reconcile the actual number of units to bedrooms, just so we're talking apples to apples, especially as this goes back to HLC. So our staff report on page 3 shows 23 bedrooms, but that's actually units according to the site plan. And so I guess staff going to need to work on that so that the facts, the matrix, the statistics are complete and correct going back to HLC. That's not, the showstopper for me today. I just want to say that. In general, I'm going to agree with staff's recommendation at this point. I know you're still in progress, but at this point, this is on page 5 of our staff report, and I do believe that the project complies with the zoning standards and is consistent with the general plan goal policies for new rental housing projects. I think you're well along your way, in my opinion. I know this ultimately lies with HLC in that regard. I want to just urge HLC. So, Mr. Drury, you're here today on behalf of HLC. So I'm going to look at you for a moment. I'm going to ask you to maybe, broaden your scope of consideration than you ordinarily would, because this ultimately resides with you and not the Planning Commission. If it were, If it were up to me, it would reside with the Planning Commission because I think that this is the right decision-making body to consider these types of projects, but we have a different process in place right now. It's not just about one policy. It's not just about one resource. It's not just about one point of view. I mean, literally and strategically. So I hope you can take that back to HLC and ask them to just take a deep breath, step back, and maybe open up the scope of consideration while maintaining your core purview, which I know is protection and preservation and sensitive development to historic resources. There's also not one definition of what's historic or what is history. Santa Barbara has a long history, and we've gone through a lot of chapters in what that history is, and we continue to evolve as a city, and we need to for modern times and modern needs. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to following this project, hopefully through to approval at some point so that we do not have to go back to 6 luxury condos at the average unit size of 1,623 square feet per unit. We don't want it. We don't need it. It doesn't serve the city. So let's find a way together how we can move forward to some level of project approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I agree with my colleagues who have said that this project is headed in the right direction. Whether it's gone far enough or not is the issue. This is one of the most sensitive sites in town. And as I said last time, it should not have been included in the AUD thing, but I think you can do a project that's high density, that does fit with the community and is sensitive to the fact that it is so close to so many historic resources. And I can't remember if I mentioned last time, but La Casa de las Fuentes, yes, is a good example, and I believe that's 52 or 53 units to the acre. I guess I would like to see an interior unit that is really livable, is one that where you can see out from. To me, to have a dwelling unit in the city of Santa Barbara, where except for the architecture, it could be anywhere. When you look out, it somehow just doesn't make for livability. But basically, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Peugeot.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to start with kind of reflecting back on my comments in May when we last saw the project. Here are some of the key things that I said at that time with that particular first proposal. The bigger issue is a sense of place with this key downtown area. Consideration is needed regarding the intersection and the people walking from the east side to the west side, the nature of the historic structures that attract tours, and the views from the open space areas. I go on to say that this includes not only the mountain views, but public views, and I would add experiences from place to place in this particular location. I also mentioned that I didn't think the commercial and relation of the public to the project, that aspect of the proposal did not go far enough, and that the commercial space was less than appropriate for this important corner. And I agree with Commissioner Lodge's statement a few minutes ago that this is one of the most important sites in the downtown area. And I also added separately that the project needs to be very authentic and meet high standards. Those were my comments in May. When I look at this project, what I observe is, first of all, some work has been done in terms of the height of the project, which does relate to mass and scale, and in lowering that from what it had been previously, I think does bring the scale down somewhat. And also it introduces a new emphasis, which I did not notice or believe existed in the prior plan, in regards to kind of celebrating and more orientation to this Paseo theme, which is interesting. And the you call it Placita, but the opening up to the intersection across Santa Barbara Street on the other side is also an interesting aspect, but not without its own challenges in design, I would add. So those were my comments then. And where we are now, I guess I would say this. The commercial component still falls short. As a matter of fact, I think it's a little less in square footage than it was before, although it has an interesting, inviting feel to it because of the orientation to the Paseo, but not yet substantial enough for me to be able to veer from my comments in May. I think if this route is taken, I think one of the things that would need to be investigated is how that Paseo feel is going to be protected in terms of being semi-public. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to protect that in perpetuity, and I think some work would need to be done there. If that's the approach that is going, which I'm not opposed to. I think it's kind of interesting, actually. I think that there's potential conflict of the first floor units. You've heard some comments today from my fellow commissioners about the second floor units. Those really aren't my concerns. I've been concerned with the first floor units and the potential conflict with everyday living and privacy issues in an area that is on a major intersection and the confluence of two very important streets and a historic buildings on all sides and just the hub of basically the historic center of town. And so I don't know how to resolve those for some of those first floor units. I don't really feel confident that it's really quite there yet in terms of particularly those units that face De La Guerra Street, not so much the units that are further up on that site plan. But I have a concern and would like to see careful attention to that if those units remain as residential units on the first floor. Last time in May, when I made my comments, for me, the project was a non-starter in that design and at that point. I'd say at this point, you've edged that out and you're going in a direction which shows you're trying to meet some of those concerns. But we like to put numbers on things and charts, and I can appreciate that to an extent. So if I had to put a number on it, I'd say you're about 25% there. I think that the key here is very serious design to accomplish what it takes at this extremely important corner. And it's no surprise to me that it's taking multiple attempts and multiple views, looking very critically at every aspect of this design, because this is a corner that deserves that level of attention. By design, I don't mean just dress up the building with articulation. I also mean the site design, the design that speaks to the sensitivity of the site and the connectivity to the public realm. And I continue to make that statement because that is the ultimate test in this site, because the traditional design and sensitivity that this site demands by its location includes the traditional aspects of relation to the outdoor paseos and communities, and I think that needs a lot of work still. So I think you're getting there. You're starting to address those issues, but we're going to have to be very, very intent that that we have something in the end that absolutely meets that authenticity that we talked about before. Those are my comments.
Thank you. And Commissioner Campanella, comments.
Okay. Let me maybe try to tie a few ideas together. This is an opportunity site, still is, even in our revised submission that was just updated, and showing that it could comply with the AUD program and a priority overlay. It also shows that there's no constraints on the site. There's nothing about historical constraints or anything else. So it's an opportunity site. But what I'd like to do is turn that a bit, and let's see about making it an opportunity for our historical landmark district and the Presidio. Right now, when you go down this block, you can see some trees when you start to get down there, but it's sort of like there should be a sign, you're now leaving the EPV, okay? Because you have the blank corner and you're about ready to enter more imitation architecture, let's say, as you start to go down the block to the residential neighborhoods. If you're going north on Santa Barbara Street, you're passing a number of parking lots. I think parking lots is probably, to me, the main landform that surrounds this property. Parking lots to the north of this site may never be built on because it's part of the Presidio outline of the buildings. They're going to be vacant. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong from staff, but those parking lots are going to stay parking lots. Unless somebody comes up with a historical context to put those in. So why don't we take advantage of an opportunity to display what the classic architecture looks like and almost say, hey, you can make a left on De La Guerra Street and go back up into where and see where the historical center of the town was. So I would like to suggest that HLC, the applicant, try to make this the best thematic, if you will, or corresponding building and architecture with the Paseos, with the characteristics of really what our historical district is, which if you're a tourist, if you don't get out of your car, you may never see them, okay, because a lot of them are hidden. Let's make this an example of what really exists in the EPV zone. And I think practically you're getting there, you're incorporating, if you stick with what the guidelines are and incorporate them and be authentic, I think it'd be a real plus to the whole district rather than a negative. Okay? That's what I would suggest. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I think, well, maybe not, but the compatibility, it's always a question. I mean, you came up with roof types and roof sizes, et cetera. I think if I look at the building and I look across De La Guerra Street to what's on the corner, it's a two-story building, and then you have a three-story type architecture coming right next to it. You've replicated that. You've replicated real close to the single story of the building next door at a little bit of a higher elevation, the school. So we can go around and look at that and, you know, is it a view? Is it really a established scenic public view across somebody's property? Established public views are also across the parking lots by the school district, I guess, if you want to call it that. This is a very important piece. It's got an elevation, it's got trees, it's got maturities. Let's use it to the maximum extent possible, not just leaving it the way it is, but really enhancing it so it really describes for those that are coming into our town, this is what Santa Barbara architecture is about, and this is what our historical district is about, and go on up the block and see the rest of it. Okay, so that's my thought, and I'm hopeful that between HLC, the historic district, those that are really interested in it, rather than being opposed or coming up with a variety of opinions, let's roll up the sleeves and make this a real good project and make it really indicative of what we're about. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, you've gotten a lot of feedback. Staff, any final comments? Mr. Hockhauser, any final comments?
Yeah, I would say a couple of them. to close here, I would say we concur with the comments about this is an opportunity site. And one of the things that I learned pursuing this application is that, historic preservation isn't about mimicking special historic buildings. It's about being sensitive to them. In fact, the Department of Interior standards for historic preservation discourages you to try to mimic, like Disneyland, old buildings. They want context and sensitivity, but they don't want you to try to create broken plaster or paint on your cracks. That's not what they're looking for. But with that regard, we think this is an opportunity site for housing. It's a great site for housing downtown. It's got the best coffee around, right around the corner. And while I'm humorous about that, I think people do want to live here. And rather than do the luxury project, as Commissioner Schwartz alluded to, we want to maintain a density, make it sensitive in terms of size, bulk, and scale, in terms of the detailing, so that it truly works as a project all around. So we're taking your comments to heart. We appreciate the positive comments. Our intention always was to go back to HLC and continue to work with them. I think we're off on the right foot. And one comment to Commissioner Jordan about the process. It is a confusing process because HLC is the final authority in this case. And the Planning Commission is kind of advisory to the HLC, but then if you appeal, you go to the council. HLC is a tough process. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of confusion sometimes when you leave that hearing. And we thought we would get some guidance by coming to this commission before we go back to HLC. And I think we've got it. I think HLC heard it, and we look forward to continuing work with you. Whether this commission or not will ever see it again is a question mark. I couldn't answer that, but we'd be delighted to come back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Drury and the HLC will be glad to work with you and massage your design, and I'm sure you'll come up with a good one.
Thank you.
I know some of the people on there, and I'm sure they're not going to be reticent about helping you.
I certainly hope so. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll close this item and move to our administrative agenda. Committee and liaison reports. Our next staff hearing officer. Anything?
A couple items last week, and the only item of note was actually a project was denied by Ms. Reardon, which means she went to great lengths to negotiate and mitigate with somebody, and they didn't want any part of it. So it was a total knockdown with a rebuild where the existing house had some part of the envelope in, I think, an interior or a front setback, and maybe not all the parking, and had a lot with no constraints, and they wanted to rebuild it with the same encroachments and couldn't come up with a good reason that should allow that. So the good news is it won't be coming our way. That I've heard that the applicant is going to go back and redesign rather than pursue that on the Planning Commission. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other committee or liaison reports? Mr. Campanella?
Thank you. In the spirit of joint meetings that we have had and are going to have, there was a joint meeting today between Downtown Parking and the Circulation Committee on bike corrals. And Rob Dayton and staff gave a summary of a follow-up with the business owners on what they think about what's occurred so far. And they've got favorable responses, significant favorable responses on utilization, style, and it really, and aesthetics, customers using, and that was very positive. There's also future requests that are coming in from Press Room, for example, made a request. Divina Tree, wandered to West Carrillo, the gym. Those areas that see a lot of people are biking, and there's really not enough space for them to utilize a bike corral. So they will be considered in the future. And right now it's very positive. And also it will be reviewed as part of the bike master plan, obviously, because where you have terminations or stopping points, you want to be able to make sure that people can safely park their bike. So it was a good meeting this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reports? With none, we'll adjourn the meeting to our next meeting next Thursday.